A single mother was forced to return her daughter's life-saving medicine. But what happened next would prove that even in our darkest moments, hope can arrive in the most unexpected ways. Before we go any further, take a moment to tell us where you're watching from. Your presence means more than you know. And if stories like this remind you that compassion still exists in this world, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us share more moments of hope just like this one. She stood there, practically invisible to the world around her. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of Riverside Pharmacy, Tamara Harris clutched a small orange prescription bottle with trembling hands, as if holding onto it tightly enough might somehow change what was about to happen. At 28, she'd learned to carry burdens most people couldn't imagine. The weight of raising a child alone, of working endless hours for barely enough, of making impossible choices with impossible grace. But today, on this cold Saturday afternoon in late November, she faced a choice that threatened to break her completely. Her 2-year-old daughter Kayla was sick. Not just sniffles and crackers sick, but desperately, frighteningly sick. The kind of sick that had kept Tamara awake all last night, counting each of her baby's labored breaths, pressing her hand to that tiny, too-hot forehead, whispering prayers into the darkness that someone, somewhere might be listening. The diagnosis had been swift and terrifying. Acute respiratory infection with early signs of pneumonia. The solution, according to the emergency clinic doctor, was equally clear. A specific antibiotic, 10 days' worth, administered faithfully. Without it, the doctor had said with the kind of serious expression that made Tamara's blood run cold, Kayla could end up hospitalized. With it, she'd likely be breathing easier within 48 hours. Simple enough. Except nothing in Tamara's life had ever been simple. That'll be $347.82, the pharmacist said, her voice carrying that particular tone of practiced neutrality that came from delivering bad news multiple times a day. The words hit Tamara like a physical blow. She'd known it would be expensive, had called ahead to ask, had hoped against hope that somehow the number would be different when she heard it in person. But knowing and accepting were two entirely different battles, and today she was losing both. The pharmacist, whose name tag read Sandra, in friendly block letters, looked at her with kind eyes framed by wire-rimmed glasses. She was perhaps in her late 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the patient demeanor of someone who had seen every possible human crisis play out across this counter. Her expression held genuine sympathy, but sympathy didn't change the numbers glowing accusingly on the register screen. Tamara's mind raced through calculations she'd already done a dozen times. Rent was due in 3 days, $6.25 for the tiny studio apartment she and Kayla called home. She had exactly that amount set aside, untouchable, because being late meant fees they couldn't afford and questions from a landlord already looking for reasons to evict them. Her checking account held $89.47. The remainder of last week's paycheck from her housekeeping job at the Riverside Hotel, where she scrubbed toilets and changed sheets for $12.50 an hour. Her next paycheck wouldn't come for another 2 weeks. The math was simple and devastating. She was $258.35 short. She might as well have been $258,000 short. Is there? Tamara's voice came out as barely a whisper, and she had to clear her throat and try again. Is there a generic version? Or maybe a payment plan? Sandra's expression softened even further, which somehow made everything worse. Honey, this is the generic. The brand name would be over $600. She typed something into her computer, her fingers moving with efficient sympathy. And we don't offer payment plans for prescriptions. I'm so sorry. Behind Tamara, the line of Saturday afternoon customers was growing. She could feel their presence like a physical pressure against her back. The shuffling feet, the subtle sighs, the weight of impatience from people who had places to be and problems of their own. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered something she couldn't quite hear but could imagine all too well. Shame washed over her in hot, prickling waves. The kind of shame that started in her chest and spread outward until even her fingertips burned with it. This was what poverty felt like, she thought. Not just the empty bank account or the worn-out shoes or the meals skipped so your child could eat. It was this, standing in a public place, unable to afford something your child desperately needed, while strangers watched and judged and waited for you to hurry up and get out of their way. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her worn canvas purse, the same one she'd been carrying for 3 years because new purses were luxuries reserved for a different life. Her fingers felt clumsy, foreign, as if they belonged to someone else. She started, then stopped. Tried again. I'm so sorry. I have to return it. The words tasted like failure. Like every mistake she'd ever made, every door that had closed in her face, every time she'd believed things might get better only to discover they could always get worse. Sandra didn't say anything, didn't need to. This scene played out here more often than most people wanted to acknowledge. The apologetic mother. The unaffordable medicine. The impossible choice between paying rent and saving a child. This was America, after all, where healthcare was a privilege and poverty was treated like a moral failing instead of a systemic crisis. With a hand that trembled visibly, Tamara reached forward and placed her fingers on the smooth plastic of the prescription bottle. It felt impossibly heavy in her palm, weighted with all the things it represented: her daughter's health, her own inadequacy, the cruel mathematics of a system designed to fail people exactly like her. "This one," she managed to say, her voice cracking as she slid the bottle back across the counter towards Sandra. "I need to return this one." She couldn't look at the pharmacist, couldn't bear to see the pity that would inevitably flicker in those kind eyes. Instead, she stared down at her own hands, at the chipped nail polish she couldn't afford to replace, at the dry, cracked skin on her knuckles from too much exposure to industrial cleaning solutions, at the silver ring on her right hand that had belonged to her grandmother and was the only piece of jewelry she owned. In that small, fluorescent-lit moment at the counter of Riverside Pharmacy, surrounded by strangers and their subtle judgment, Tamara Harris felt like she was drowning. Like she was failing at the one job that mattered more than anything else in the world. Being Kayla's mother, being enough for her, protecting her from a world that was so often cruel and cold and indifferent. Across the pharmacy, standing near the children's vitamin display with its cheerful cartoon characters and rainbow colors, was William Carter. To anyone who happened to glance his way, he appeared to be nothing more than a casually dressed father on a weekend errand. His gray wool sweater and dark jeans were expensive if you knew quality, but understated enough to blend seamlessly into the Saturday afternoon crowd. At 36, he had the kind of quiet, confident presence that came from years of making decisions that affected thousands of lives, but nothing about his appearance today suggested wealth or power or influence. William was, in fact, one of the most successful pharmaceutical executives in the country. As CEO of Carter Pharmaceuticals, he oversaw a company worth $4.2 billion, a company whose innovations had revolutionized treatments for childhood diseases and whose name appeared on prescription bottles and medicine cabinets across America. His face occasionally graced the covers of industry publications and business magazines, though he made every effort to avoid that kind of public attention. But today, in this ordinary neighborhood pharmacy, he was simply Chloe's father. Chloe Carter, 5 years old with honey blonde curls that refused to stay in her ponytail and her father's thoughtful hazel eyes, stood beside him, clutching his hand while she debated between two nearly identical bottles of gummy vitamins. She was the absolute center of William's universe, the light that had guided him through the darkest period of his life, the reason he got up each morning and the face he thought of before sleep each night. His late wife Margaret had died 3 years ago from complications during Chloe's birth. Despite having access to the best doctors money could buy, despite a state-of-the-art hospital and cutting-edge medical care, despite William's wealth and connections and desperate pleas, she was gone. The joy of Chloe's arrival had been forever intertwined with the devastating loss of the woman he'd loved. And in those first terrible months of new fatherhood and fresh grief, holding his infant daughter in the middle of the night, William had made a promise that he would use his privilege, his wealth, his position to help others who didn't have what he had. That Margaret's death wouldn't be meaningless. That Chloe would grow up understanding that with great fortune came great responsibility. It was a promise he'd tried to keep through charitable donations and foundation work, through policy advocacy and pharmaceutical pricing programs. But if he was honest with himself, really, truly honest, it had always felt somewhat abstract. Numbers on spreadsheets. Statistics in reports. Important, necessary, but removed. They were here today because Chloe had insisted on picking out her own vitamins, the ones with the princess characters she loved. William's personal assistant could have had a case delivered to their home with a single text message. But Chloe had looked at him over breakfast with those big, imploring eyes, Margaret's eyes, and said, "I want to pick them myself, Daddy. With you." And William, who could negotiate billion-dollar deals without flinching but was completely powerless against his daughter's wishes, had immediately agreed. He'd been standing there, absently reading vitamin labels while Chloe deliberated, when he heard it, a woman's voice, quiet and desperate, drifting across the pharmacy from the prescription counter. Something in that voice made him turn. He saw her then. A young black woman, beautiful despite the exhaustion carved into every line of her face, despite the defeat that hunched her shoulders and bowed her head. She couldn't have been much past 30. Her clothes were clean but worn, jeans with a small patch on one knee, a navy blue jacket that had seen better seasons, sneakers that had been white once. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, practical rather than styled. Everything about her spoke of someone working hard, struggling hard, trying hard. She was sliding a prescription bottle back across the counter, her hands shaking, tears threatening to spill from her dark eyes. William couldn't hear exactly what she was saying, but he didn't need to. The scene told its own story, one that was being repeated in pharmacies and hospitals and clinics across the country every single day. A story about the price of survival in a nation that treated healthcare as a commodity rather than a right. He'd encountered poverty before, of course. He donated millions to charitable causes annually. He sat on nonprofit boards. He toured underfunded clinics and reviewed proposals for assistance programs. But it had always been filtered through presentations and reports, analyzed through data and policy recommendations. Academic, abstract, important but distant. This was different. This was 3 yards away. This was real and immediate and heartbreaking in its intimacy. He watched as the woman, he didn't know her name yet, didn't know her story, knew nothing except that she was in pain, fumbled with her purse, her movements jerky with shame. He watched as other customers in line behind her shifted impatiently, oblivious or indifferent to the human crisis unfolding. He watched as she refused to meet the pharmacist's eyes, as if eye contact might shatter what little composure she had left. And something deep within William's chest cracked open. Not pity exactly, though there was compassion. Not guilt, though there was recognition of his own impossible privilege. It was something deeper and more visceral, a sudden, overwhelming understanding that this moment mattered, that what he did next would matter. "Daddy," Chloe whispered, tugging on his sweater with her small hand. Her voice held confusion and something that might have been the first stirrings of empathy. "Why is that lady crying?" William looked down at his daughter's innocent, questioning face, a face that had never known hunger, never known fear about accessing medical care, never experienced what it meant to be overlooked by systems meant to protect everyone equally. How could he explain the brutal mathematics of inequality to a 5-year-old whose every need had always been met before she even knew to ask? "She's having a very difficult day, sweetheart," he said softly, kneeling to her level. Sometimes grown-ups have to make very hard choices. But even as he spoke those careful words, William watched the woman pay for nothing, watched her turn toward the exit with hunched shoulders and bowed head, moving like someone who'd learned to make herself invisible because visibility meant judgment. And in that moment, standing in an ordinary pharmacy on an ordinary Saturday afternoon, William Carter made a decision. He wasn't going to let this stranger, this woman whose name he didn't even know, simply disappear into the cold November air. He wasn't going to let her carry that impossible burden alone. He didn't fully understand why, didn't pause to analyze the impulse or calculate the implications. He just knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones and thrummed through his blood like an answered prayer, that he had to act. That this was the moment. That this was what his promise to Margaret had really meant all along. He squeezed Chloe's hand gently. "Sweetheart, I need you to stay right here by the vitamins for just 1 minute, okay? I need to help that lady." Chloe nodded solemnly, sensing something important in her father's tone, and William stood. He walked with sudden, decisive purpose toward the pharmacy counter where Sandra was already processing the next customer's prescription. His heart pounded, not with nervousness but with the strange, exhilarating clarity of knowing exactly what needed to be done. He waited his turn, mind racing through a dozen implications, a dozen possible futures branching from this single choice. And when the next customer moved aside, William stepped forward to the counter. "Excuse me," he said to Sandra, his voice quiet but absolutely firm. "That prescription, the one for the woman who just left, I'd like to pay for it." Sandra's head snapped up from her computer screen, her eyes widening behind her wire-rimmed glasses. For a moment, she simply stared at William as if needing to confirm she'd heard him correctly. Then her gaze shifted past him, searching the pharmacy entrance where the young mother had disappeared just moments before. "Sir, are you sure?" Sandra asked, her professional neutrality cracking slightly to reveal genuine surprise. "Completely sure," William said, already pulling out his wallet. "Whatever the total was, $347.82, correct? I'd like to pay for it now." The customer who'd been standing beside William, a middle-aged man holding a bottle of cough syrup, turned to stare. Then the woman behind him craned her neck to see what was happening. Within seconds, the attention of everyone in line had shifted toward the pharmacy counter, curiosity rippling through the small crowd like a wave. But William barely noticed. His entire focus was on making this happen before the young mother, the woman with the haunted eyes and trembling hands, disappeared completely into the cold November afternoon. "Let me just..." Sandra's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up the prescription that had been canceled just moments before. "Okay, yes, I can process this. It'll take me a few minutes to prepare it again." "That's fine," William said, handing her his credit card. "Take whatever time you need." It was then that everything changed. Sandra glanced at the card, preparing to swipe it through the reader, when her eyes caught on the name embossed in silver letters. Her hand froze mid-motion. She looked at the card, then up at William, then back at the card, her expression transforming from surprised kindness to something approaching shock. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Are you William Carter?" "From Carter Pharmaceuticals." William felt his jaw tighten slightly. He'd been hoping to do this quietly, anonymously if possible. But he should have known better than to use a card with his full name on it. "Yes," he said simply, offering no elaboration. The whispers in line behind him intensified. Someone gasped softly. He heard fragments of conversation. "Did she say Carter Pharmaceuticals? And isn't that the guy who... and, oh my God, that's him." Sandra's hand was still frozen, holding his credit card. She looked from the card to her computer screen, then back to William, and something complicated passed across her face. "Mr. Carter, sir, you might want to know something." She paused, seeming to gather courage. "This prescription, the one you're paying for, it's for Clarity Med. That's one of your company's antibiotics." The words hit William like a physical blow. For a moment he couldn't quite process what she'd said. Then the full weight of it crashed over him. "Could I?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Could I see the bottle?" Sandra hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then nodded. She turned to the shelf behind her, where the prescription she'd been preparing sat partially filled. She handed him the orange bottle, and William found himself staring at something he'd seen thousands of times in reports and presentations and board meetings, but never quite like this. There it was. The Carter Pharmaceuticals logo. The drug name, Clarity Med, that his research team had spent 3 years developing. The dosage instructions for pediatric use, the very application they'd been so proud to get FDA approval for. And there, on the small price sticker Sandra had printed before the woman, before the young mother, had been forced to return it, $347.82. William's mind, trained by years of business school and corporate leadership, immediately began calculating. He knew these numbers, had reviewed them countless times in financial reports. The production cost for a 10-day course of Clarity Med was approximately $12, maybe $14 if you factored in packaging and distribution. The wholesale price his company charged to pharmacies was around $180. And the retail price, the price that was supposed to include the pharmacy's markup and dispensing fees, was apparently $347.82. He'd justified these numbers his entire career. Had sat in boardrooms defending them to shareholders and critics alike. Research and development costs ran into the hundreds of millions. Clinical trials were expensive. FDA approval processes were lengthy and complex. Patent protection was limited. Companies needed to recoup their investments and fund future innovations. It was all true. It was all rational. It was all economically sound. But standing here, holding this bottle, knowing that a mother had just been forced to return it because she couldn't afford the 2,500% markup on something her sick child desperately needed, all of those justifications crumbled into dust. Mr. Carter? Sandra's voice pulled him back to the present. Would you still like me to process the payment? William looked up at her, then at the small crowd that had gathered, watching this scene unfold with rapt attention. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced in years. But he also felt something else, a strange, clarifying sense of purpose. Yes, he said firmly, handing her back the bottle. Please prepare the prescription. I'll wait. As Sandra turned to begin counting out the pills, William heard the pharmacy door chime. He turned, hoping against hope that the young mother might have come back, might have forgotten something or changed her mind or... She stood just inside the entrance, her canvas purse clutched against her chest like a shield, her eyes wide with confusion and something that might have been fear. She'd clearly seen his car in the parking lot, or perhaps she'd simply had second thoughts about giving up so easily, about returning home to her sick daughter empty-handed. Their eyes met across the pharmacy, and William saw the exact moment she registered what was happening at the counter. Saw comprehension dawn, followed immediately by embarrassment so acute it was painful to witness. No, she said, her voice carrying across the space between them. No, sir, I can't. You can't do that. She rushed toward the counter, her footsteps quick and urgent. Up close, William could see the exhaustion more clearly, the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the tension in her jaw, the way her hands shook even as she tried to hold herself together. Please, she said, addressing William directly now, her voice trembling but firm. Sir, I appreciate the thought, I really do, but I can't let you do this. I don't even know you. That's exactly why I can do this, William said gently. He was acutely aware of Chloe still standing by the vitamin display, watching with wide eyes, taking in every word. This was important, not just for this stranger but for his daughter to witness. Please. I have a daughter too. He gestured toward Chloe, who gave a small, shy wave. I understand how frightening it is when they're sick. How desperate you feel to make them better. Tamara, he still didn't know her name, realized he should ask, looked at Chloe and something in her expression softened slightly. But her pride, that fierce, protective pride that was sometimes all people in her position had left, wouldn't let her accept so easily. I'll pay you back, she said quickly. I get paid in 2 weeks and I can send you money every month until... No, William interrupted gently but firmly. This isn't a loan. It's a gift. One parent to another. Please let me do this. Before she could protest further, he turned back to Sandra and handed her his credit card. Please process the payment. Sandra, who'd been watching this exchange with increasingly misty eyes, nodded and quickly swiped the card. The transaction completed with a soft beep that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Thank you, Mr. Carter, Sandra said softly, handing him back his card and then turning to finish preparing the prescription. It'll be just a few more minutes. William pocketed his card and turned back to the young woman, who stood frozen, tears now streaming freely down her face. She wasn't sobbing, seemed determined not to break down completely in this public space, but the tears came anyway, silent and unstoppable. I don't. She started, then stopped, swallowing hard. I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. It's more than enough, William assured her. He felt Chloe appear beside him, taking his hand, and he squeezed it gently. What's your daughter's name? The question seemed to surprise her. She blinked, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. Kayla, she said, her voice softening with the pure, uncomplicated love that came with speaking a beloved child's name. Her name is Kayla. Kayla Harris. William felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. The name echoed in his mind, connecting to memories he hadn't thought about in years, to a voice from his past that had changed the entire trajectory of his life. Harris, he repeated, his own voice suddenly strange in his ears. His heart had begun to pound in a way that had nothing to do with the stress of the moment and everything to do with the impossible possibility forming in his mind. Excuse me, but are you related to Dr. Marcus Harris? By any chance? The effect of his words was immediate and profound. Tamara's eyes widened, fresh tears spilling over, and her hand flew to her mouth as if to hold back a sob. He was my father, she whispered, the words half muffled by her hand. He passed away 2 years ago. She stared at William with an expression caught somewhere between disbelief and desperate hope. How do you know his name? William felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The pharmacy, the watching crowd, even Chloe beside him, everything faded except the woman standing before him. The daughter of Marcus Harris. The granddaughter of the man who had saved his life, professionally and personally, when no one else would take a chance on him. Dr. Harris, William said, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't expected, was my mentor. He paused, trying to find words adequate to describe what Marcus Harris had meant to him. He believed in me when no one else did. He co-signed a loan so I could continue my research when every bank and every investor had turned me down. He's the reason Carter Pharmaceuticals exists. He's the reason any of this, he gestured vaguely, encompassing not just the pharmacy but his entire life, his success, everything, exists at all. Tamara's legs seemed to give out slightly. She reached for the counter to steady herself, her face a mask of shock and grief and something that might have been wonder. I didn't know, she breathed. I didn't know about you. About any of this. Your prescription is ready, Sandra said softly, appearing beside them with a white paper bag. She handed it to Tamara with both hands as if it were something precious. Your daughter is going to be okay. Give her the full course even if she starts feeling better. Tamara took the bag with shaking hands, clutching it to her chest like the lifeline it was. She looked from the bag to William, her eyes swimming with tears and questions and emotions too complex to name. My father, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My father helped you. And now she couldn't finish the sentence, overcome. William's own eyes were burning now. He thought of Marcus Harris, of that small office at the university where an older black professor had listened to a desperate graduate student's ideas and seen not risk, but possibility. He thought of the countless times over the years he tried to repay that debt, only to be told by Marcus to pay it forward, not back. And now here stood Marcus's daughter. Here in this pharmacy, unable to afford medication from the company her father had helped create. The cosmic poetry of it was almost too much to bear. Tamara, he said, using her name for the first time, reading it from the prescription label. I think we need to talk. Not here and not now. You need to get home to Kayla. But soon. Would that be all right? Tamara nodded, unable to speak, still clutching the medicine that would save her daughter. The daughter Marcus Harris had never met, never known. Here, William said, pulling out his phone. Give me your number. I'll call you tomorrow. We'll figure this out. As Tamara fumbled for her own phone, her hands still shaking, William looked down at Chloe, who was watching the entire exchange with wide, understanding eyes. Daddy, she whispered. Are you helping because of Margaret? The question hit him square in the chest. Yes, sweetheart, he said, kneeling beside her. Because of Margaret and because it's the right thing to do. Remember that, okay? When we have the chance to help someone, we take it. Always. Chloe nodded solemnly, then surprised everyone by walking over to Tamara and taking her hand. I hope Kayla feels better soon, she said in her small, serious voice. Tamara looked down at this child, this privileged, innocent child whose father had just saved her daughter's life, and something in her expression cracked open completely. She knelt down to Chloe's level, tears streaming freely now. Thank you, sweetheart, she said, her voice breaking. Thank you both. I'll never forget this. Never. As Tamara finally left the pharmacy, clutching the medicine and William's phone number, she kept looking back as if to confirm this had really happened, that this wasn't some desperate fever dream born of exhaustion and fear. William stood at the counter, Chloe's hand in his, and watched her go. Behind him, the other customers had gone quiet, some wiping their own eyes, others simply staring at the space where this impossible, beautiful moment had just unfolded. Sandra cleared her throat softly. Mr. Carter, she said, and when he turned to her, he saw that she too was crying. I've worked in this pharmacy for 23 years. I've seen that scene, a parent having to return medicine, more times than I can count. And no one has ever. She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. William nodded, understanding. Then he looked down at the bottle of vitamins Chloe had finally chosen, the princess one she'd wanted, and had to suppress a bitter laugh at the absurdity of it all. A $12 bottle of vitamins. A $347.82 bottle of medicine that cost him maybe $15 to produce. His company. His medicine. His pricing. Marcus Harris's daughter, unable to afford it. Come on, princess, he said to Chloe, his voice rough. Let's go home. But he knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't over. It was, in fact, just beginning. The drive home from the pharmacy was quiet. Chloe sat in her booster seat, clutching her princess vitamins, unusually contemplative for a 5-year-old. William gripped the steering wheel, his mind miles and years away, pulled inexorably back to a different time, a different version of himself. 20 years ago. God, had it really been that long? He'd been 26 then, a graduate student at State University with more ambition than sense and a research proposal that everyone, literally everyone, had told him was impossible. The idea had consumed him. Affordable pediatric medications that could be produced efficiently without sacrificing efficacy. A system that prioritized access over profit margins. It was idealistic, perhaps naively so, but William had believed in it with the fervor of youth. His thesis advisor had been diplomatic but firm. It's interesting work, William, but not commercially viable. You need to be more realistic about pharmaceutical economics. The university's research committee had been less diplomatic. This proposal demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of how drug development works in the real world. Every grant application he'd submitted had been rejected. Every investor he'd pitched to had passed. Banks wouldn't loan him money for research they deemed financially unsound. His student loans were mounting. His girlfriend, the woman he'd planned to marry, had left him, tired of dating someone with his head in the clouds and his bank account in the red. William had been 3 weeks from dropping out, from abandoning years of work and returning to his small hometown to take a job in his uncle's insurance office, when he'd gotten the email. "Mr. Carter, I've been reviewing your research proposal. I'd like to meet with you. Tomorrow 2 p.m. my office. Dr. Marcus Harris." William had barely known who Marcus Harris was at the time, a biochemistry professor, older, someone whose name appeared on papers William had skimmed but never studied closely. He'd shown up to that meeting expecting another polite rejection, another well-meaning lecture about commercial viability and real-world constraints. Instead, he'd found salvation. Dr. Harris's office had been small and cluttered, every surface covered with papers and journals and photos of students spanning decades. The man himself had been in his late 50s then, with graying hair, warm brown eyes behind reading glasses, and a presence that somehow managed to be both gentle and commanding. "Sit down, William," he'd said, gesturing to a worn chair across from his desk. "Tell me why everyone else is wrong about your research." For 2 hours William had talked. Dr. Harris had listened, occasionally asking questions that cut straight to the heart of potential problems William hadn't yet solved, but never dismissing, never discouraging. When William finally ran out of words, exhausted and hoarse, Dr. Harris had been quiet for a long moment. Then he'd said something William would never forget. "You know what I see when I look at your proposal? I see my daughter's future. I see every parent who's ever had to choose between rent and medicine. I see a world that could be better, if someone had the courage to make it so." "You believe in it?" William had asked, hardly daring to hope. "I believe in you," Dr. Harris had corrected. "The research will take work, lots of it. But that's what research is. The question is, are you willing to do that work?" "Yes," William had said without hesitation. "But I'm out of funding. I'm out of options." Dr. Harris had leaned back in his chair, studying William with those sharp, kind eyes. "How much do you need?" "At minimum, $50,000. To secure lab space, buy materials, hire an assistant, survive for a year while I'll co-sign a loan," Dr. Harris had said simply. William had stared at him, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "I'll co-sign a personal loan for $50,000. That should be enough to get you started, yes?" "Dr. Harris, you barely know me. If I fail, and everyone seems to think I will, you'd be liable for—" "I know," Dr. Harris had said calmly. "I'm a tenured professor with a modest salary and 2 mortgages, one on my house, one on my daughter's college tuition. If you default, it would be financially devastating for my family." He paused, letting that sink in. "But I don't think you're going to fail. And even if you do, some risks are worth taking." "Why?" William had whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Dr. Harris had smiled then, a sad, knowing smile. "Because 25 years ago I was you. A black graduate student with ideas that made people uncomfortable, asking questions about why our systems work the way they do. And no one took a chance on me. No one co-signed my loan or opened doors or believed in my vision. I had to fight for every inch, twice as hard for half the recognition." He leaned forward. "This isn't charity, William. It's an investment in someone who will change the world. Just promise me you'll remember where you came from. Promise me that when you have the power to help someone who reminds you of yourself, you'll take it." "I promise," William had said, tears in his eyes. They'd gone to the bank the next day. Dr. Harris had co-signed loan documents that put his family's financial security at risk for a graduate student he'd met once. It should have been insane. It should have been irresponsible. It had been the most profound act of faith William had ever experienced. The research had taken 3 years. 3 years of 18-hour days and countless failures and breakthroughs that came at 3 in the morning. Dr. Harris had been there through all of it, not just as a co-signer but as a mentor, a guide, sometimes the only person who still believed when William himself had doubts. When the patent was approved, when the first investor finally came through, when Carter Pharmaceuticals Incorporated and began to grow, William had tried to pay Dr. Harris back. The $50,000 plus interest, plus compensation for his time, plus gratitude that couldn't be measured in dollars. Dr. Harris had refused. Every time. Pay it forward, not back, he'd said. It had become his mantra. I don't want your money, William. I want you to remember your promise. I want you to be the person who opens doors for the next desperate graduate student. I want you to build a company that doesn't forget what it's like to need help. William had tried. God knew he'd tried. He'd established scholarship programs and research grants. He'd funded fellowships and mentored students. He'd donated millions to causes Dr. Harris cared about. But had he really kept his promise? Had he built a company that remembered? Or had he, somewhere along the way, allowed the justifications and the profit margins and the shareholder expectations to transform him into exactly what he'd once vowed not to become? The question haunted him as he pulled into his driveway, as he helped Chloe out of her car seat, as he walked into the vast empty house that wealth had bought but that still felt hollow 3 years after Margaret's death. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Tamara Harris. Thank you again for today. I gave Kayla her first dose. She's already breathing easier. I don't have words for what you did for us. William stared at the message, at the name Harris on his screen, and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't coincidence. This couldn't be. The universe, or Dr. Harris himself, somehow, had placed Marcus Harris's daughter in that pharmacy, unable to afford medicine from the company her father had helped create. The cosmic irony was almost unbearable. But it was also, perhaps, an opportunity. A chance to finally, truly fulfill the promise he'd made all those years ago. His fingers moved across the screen before he could second-guess himself. I'm so glad to hear she's doing better. Tamara, I know this is overwhelming and I know we're strangers. But I'd really like to talk to you about your father. Would you and Kayla be willing to come to dinner tonight? Nothing formal, just a chance to talk. To share stories. Please. He sent the message and immediately worried he'd been too forward, too presumptuous. She'd just been through a traumatic experience at the pharmacy. She had a sick child at home. The last thing she probably wanted was... His phone buzzed. Tonight. I know it's sudden, he typed quickly. But I have so much I want to tell you about your father. Things you might not know. And I think he'd want us to talk. Several long moments passed. William watched the screen, saw the 3 dots appear and disappear several times as she typed and deleted. Finally, every instinct I have is telling me this is crazy. That I should say no, that I don't even know you. William's heart sank. Of course. He pushed too hard, too fast. This woman had been through enough today without. Another message appeared, but something in the way you talked about my father. You knew him. Really knew him. And I realized today that I didn't. Not really. We were estranged when he died. I never got to tell him about Kayla, never got to fix things between us. If you can help me understand him better, understand the man he was when he wasn't being my father. Yes. We'll come to dinner. Then, but I need to make sure Kayla gets her medicine first. And I need to give her a few hours to rest. Would 6 p.m. work? William felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight since the moment he'd learned Tamara's last name. 6 p.m. is perfect. I'll text you the address. And Tamara? Your father was an extraordinary man. I'm sorry you lost him before you could reconcile. Me too, came the reply. Me too. By 5:30 p.m., William was in the kitchen, having given his staff the evening off. Chloe sat at the counter, supposedly helping but mostly sneaking bites of cheese while William prepared something simple. Pasta with marinara, garlic bread, a salad. Nothing fancy. Nothing that would make Tamara feel uncomfortable in her worn jeans and patched jacket. Is this the lady from the pharmacy? Chloe asked, watching her father work with unusual focus. Yes, sweetheart. And her daddy helped you? Like you helped her today? Yes. He helped me when I had nothing. when no one else would. Chloe was quiet for a moment, processing this with the serious concentration she sometimes showed. Daddy? Yes. I'm glad you helped her. I think Margaret would be glad too. William's hand stilled on the knife he'd been using to slice bread. He turned to look at his daughter, this wise, empathetic child who'd never known her mother but somehow carried her spirit. I think you're right, he said, his voice thick. I think Margaret would be very glad. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 p.m. William wiped his hands on a towel, took a deep breath, and walked to the front door with Chloe at his side. When he opened it, Tamara stood there with Kayla on her hip. The little girl looked better than she probably had this morning. Her eyes were clearer, her breathing less labored, but she still clung to her mother with the exhausted neediness of a sick child. Tamara herself looked nervous, out of place in this wealthy neighborhood with its manicured lawns and expensive cars. But when William looked at her face, really looked, he saw it clearly now. She had her father's determined chin, his fierce, intelligent eyes, the same proud bearing that refused to bow even under impossible weight. Tamara, he said warmly, thank you for coming. Please come in. She stepped inside hesitantly, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the spacious foyer, the elegant staircase, the obvious wealth that surrounded them. William saw her shrink slightly, saw her pull Kayla closer as if the child were armor against her own discomfort. I know this is a lot, William said gently, but I promise this is just dinner. Just conversation. Just two people whose lives were both changed by the same extraordinary man. Tamara met his eyes, and in that moment something passed between them, a shared grief, a shared gratitude, a shared sense that this meeting was somehow meant to be. Okay, she said softly. Tell me about my father. Tell me about the man who believed in you. And as William led her toward the kitchen, toward the simple meal he'd prepared, toward the stories that would bridge 20 years and two very different lives, he felt Dr. Marcus Harris's presence like a benediction. The debt, he realized, wasn't unpaid. It was simply being passed forward, exactly as Marcus had always intended. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of honoring that promise in the way it had always been meant to be honored. Not with money, but with opportunity, with hope, with the kind of transformative faith that Dr. Marcus Harris had shown a desperate graduate student 20 years ago. Pay it forward, not back, William whispered, so softly that no one else could hear. But somehow he thought Marcus Harris might have heard anyway. Tamara's apartment building stood at the end of Riverside Street, where the neighborhood's already modest homes gave way to structures that time and economics had forgotten. The brick facade was crumbling in places, and the front steps had cracks wide enough that weeds pushed through in defiant green patches. A broken security door hung perpetually open, its lock long since defeated by wear and neglect. William pulled his car to the curb, noting the iron bars on ground-floor windows, the overflowing dumpster in the side alley, the general air of exhaustion that hung over the building like a shroud. This was where Tamara called home, where she was raising her daughter, where she returned each night after scrubbing other people's toilets and changing other people's sheets. It's not much, Tamara said quietly from the passenger seat, reading his silence as judgment. But it's clean. And it's ours. I didn't say anything, William replied gently. You didn't have to. She unbuckled her seatbelt with movements that were stiff with defensive pride. I know what you're thinking. I know what this place looks like to someone like you. William turned to face her fully. Someone like me thought he was going to lose his research, his career, his entire future because he couldn't afford to continue. Someone like me knows what it feels like to be one paycheck from disaster. I was just thinking about how much courage it takes to keep going when the world keeps stacking the deck against you. Tamara's expression softened slightly, though suspicion still lingered in her eyes. You really were like me once? I really was. Your father saw past the version of me the world saw, broke, idealistic, probably foolish, and saw who I could become. That's what I'm trying to do now. See who you are, not just your circumstances. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, come on up. Fair warning, it's small. Small was an understatement. The studio apartment was barely larger than William's master closet. But as he followed Tamara up 3 flights of stairs, the elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked permanent. He found himself unexpectedly moved by what he saw when she unlocked her door. The space was immaculate. Every surface gleamed despite the age of the fixtures. The cramped kitchenette had dishes drying in a rack, arranged with careful precision. The single room served as bedroom, living room, and nursery, but somehow Tamara had made it work. A queen bed occupied one corner, made up with a faded but clean floral comforter. Opposite it, a playpen created a small domain for Kayla, surrounded by a modest collection of toys that William recognized as the kind sold at dollar stores, bright plastic, simple but clearly well-loved. His eyes caught on a small shelf above the kitchenette sink. There, in simple frames, were photographs. He moved closer, drawn by what he recognized even before he could see the details clearly. Dr. Marcus Harris. Young in some photos, older in others. In his university office, surrounded by books and papers. At what looked like a graduation ceremony, his arm around a much younger Tamara, both of them beaming. Another of him holding an infant, Tamara, presumably, with the tender expression of a new father discovering love he hadn't known existed. That was him, Tamara said softly, appearing beside William with Kayla in her arms. The little girl was whimpering, her face flushed with fever, her breathing still carrying that frightening wheeze. That's my dad. He looks exactly as I remember him, William said, his voice catching. That photo in his office, I spent so many hours there. I can almost see myself sitting in that chair across from his desk. But Tamara was already moving toward the small efficiency fridge, pulling out a bottle of water. She carried Kayla to the bed, sitting down with the practiced efficiency of a mother who'd done this countless times. From a small table beside the bed, she retrieved a medicine syringe. "Come here, baby girl," she murmured to Kayla. "I know you don't feel good, but we're going to make you better." William watched as she carefully measured out the prescribed dose of Clarity Med, his company's drug, the one that cost pennies to produce and hundreds to buy, and coaxed Kayla to take it. The little girl resisted at first, turning her head away, but Tamara was patient and gentle, singing a soft song between attempts until Kayla finally swallowed the medicine. "Good girl," Tamara praised, kissing her daughter's forehead. "So brave. That's my brave girl." William felt something catch in his throat. He remembered Chloe at 6 months old, her first fever, his own terror despite having access to the best pediatricians money could buy. He'd been able to call a doctor at 2 a.m. and have them at his house within 30 minutes. He'd been able to afford any test, any treatment, without a second thought. Tamara had been standing in a pharmacy, forced to return the medicine her daughter needed because $347.82 might as well have been $347,000. "Hi," Chloe said suddenly, peeking out from behind her father to look at Kayla with shy curiosity. "I'm Chloe. Are you sick?" Kayla, despite her fever and obvious discomfort, managed a small smile. "Sick," she repeated, her 2-year-old vocabulary limited but her meaning clear. "I brought you something," Chloe continued, pulling a small stuffed rabbit from her jacket pocket, one of her own toys that she'd insisted on bringing. "His name is Mr. Hoppers. He makes me feel better when I'm sad. Maybe he can help you." She offered the toy with such genuine sweetness that Tamara's eyes immediately welled with tears. Kayla reached for the rabbit, clutching it to her chest, and managed another small smile. "Thank you," Tamara said to Chloe, her voice thick. "That's very kind of you." "It's okay," Chloe said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "Daddy says when people need help, we help them. Always." An hour later, after Kayla had drifted into a more peaceful sleep than she'd managed in days, Tamara stood in her tiny bathroom, staring at her reflection with growing anxiety. She didn't have appropriate clothes for dinner at a billionaire's home. Her nicest outfit was the one she wore to church. A simple black dress that was at least 5 years old, worn thin at the seams. Everything else was work clothes or casual wear, all of it showing the kind of wear that came from being washed too many times and worn too often. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted when she emerged, finding William waiting patiently while Chloe played quietly with Kayla's small collection of board books. "I don't have anything to wear to, wherever you live." "What you're wearing is perfect," William said, gesturing to her jeans and simple blue sweater. "I'm not taking you to a restaurant or a formal event. I'm taking you to my home, where we're having pasta that I'm going to cook myself. The only dress code is comfortable." "But, Tamara," he interrupted gently, "your father wore the same 3 sport coats the entire time I knew him. One had elbow patches because he refused to replace it even after it wore through. He didn't care about appearances or status or any of that. He cared about ideas and people and making the world better. I learned that from him. So please trust me when I say you're perfect exactly as you are." She wanted to argue, but something in his expression, the genuine respect, the lack of judgment, made her believe him. The drive to William's home was quiet, Tamara's nervousness increasing with each mile as the neighborhood gradually transformed. The rundown buildings of Riverside gave way to modest homes, then nicer homes, then estates with gates and long driveways. When William finally turned through a pair of iron gates that opened automatically, Tamara's stomach knotted. The house, no mansion, that came into view was nothing like she'd expected. It was modern and sprawling, all glass and clean lines, perched on a hill overlooking the city. Lights glowed warmly from within, making it look less like a statement of wealth and more like something from an architectural magazine. Beautiful but somehow cold. "William," she said as he parked in front of the 3-car garage, "I can't. This is too much. I don't belong here." "Neither do I most days," he said with surprising honesty. He turned to look at her in the dim light of the car's interior. This house was Margaret's dream. My late wife. She designed every detail, picked every fixture. After she died, I thought about selling it 100 times. It felt too big, too empty, too much a reminder of everything I'd lost. But Chloe loves it. It's the only home she's known. So I stayed." He paused. "What I'm trying to say is, this house doesn't define who I am. It's just a building. A very expensive building, but still just a building. You're not here to be impressed. You're here so we can talk about someone who mattered to both of us." Inside, Tamara's preconceptions shattered further. Yes, everything was expensive and elegant. The hardwood floors, the soaring ceilings, the art on the walls. But it was also clearly a home where a child lived. Chloe's toys were scattered across the living room floor. Crayon drawings decorated the refrigerator. Photos of a beautiful woman, Margaret, Tamara assumed, were everywhere, smiling down from frames with the kind of joy that made their loss even more profound. "She was beautiful," Tamara said, pausing before one photo that showed Margaret and William on what looked like their wedding day. "She was everything," William said simply. "When I lost her, I lost the part of myself that knew how to hope. Chloe's the only thing that kept me going." They moved to the kitchen, where William had clearly been preparing dinner earlier. He'd sent his staff home, he explained, because this needed to be personal. Just them, their daughters, and the memory of Marcus Harris. As William cooked, real cooking, not reheating something a chef had prepared, they talked. Chloe and Kayla played nearby, the medicine finally beginning to help the younger girl feel more like herself. "Tell me about him," William said, stirring pasta sauce. "Not the professor everyone saw. The father you knew." Tamara smiled, sad and fond. "He was stubborn. So stubborn. Once he decided something was right, there was no changing his mind. He taught me to stand up for myself, to never settle, to never let anyone make me feel small." Her smile faded. "Maybe he taught me too well. I got pregnant by a man who promised me the world and disappeared the second he saw that positive test. I was too proud to ask Dad for help. Too ashamed to admit I'd made a mistake. We fought about it, about my independence, about whether I was being strong or just foolish. And then he died before I could tell him he was going to be a grandfather. Before I could say I was sorry. She was crying now, and William set down his spoon to hand her a tissue. He knew, William said gently. About Kayla. Tamara's head snapped up. What? Wait here. He left the kitchen and returned a few minutes later with a worn folder. Inside were documents Tamara recognized from stories but had never seen. The loan papers her father had co-signed, letters of recommendation he'd written, photos of him and a much younger William in a laboratory. He sent me these copies years ago, William explained. Said he wanted me to remember where I'd started. But there's something else. Something I didn't understand until today. He pulled out a handwritten note, the paper creased from folding and unfolding, the ink slightly faded. Dr. Marcus Harris's distinctive handwriting filled the page. He sent this 6 months before he died, William said, handing it to Tamara. Read it. With shaking hands, Tamara began to read her father's final words to the man he'd mentored. William, I'm writing to ask a favor, though I hope you'll never need to fulfill it. My daughter Tamara and I are estranged, my fault as much as hers. She's pregnant and alone, too proud to ask for help, too hurt to accept what I offer. I hear she's struggling and it breaks my heart. But I also know she's strong just like her mother was. If something happens to me before we reconcile, I'm asking you to look out for her if you can. Not charity, she'd never accept that. But opportunity. A chance. The same thing I gave you. Consider it paying forward what I could never let you pay back. Marcus. Tamara couldn't see the words anymore through her tears. He knew, she whispered. He knew about Kayla. He was worried about me. And I never called him back. I never. William wrapped an arm around her shoulders as she sobbed, all the grief and guilt and regret of 2 years pouring out in his warm kitchen while their daughters played nearby and pasta simmered on the stove. He loved you, William said firmly. Everything he did, everything he was, came back to wanting the best for you. He told me once that you were his proudest achievement. Not his research, not his awards, you. I wasted so much time being angry, Tamara said between sobs. So much pride. And now he's gone and I can't fix it. So we fix it for him, William said. We honor his memory by doing what he asked. By giving you the same chance he gave me. He waited until she looked at him, her eyes red but focusing. Tamara, I want to offer you a job. She blinked, confused. What? A job. Director of Patient Advocacy for Carter Pharmaceuticals. Creating programs to help families afford medications. Making sure what happened to you today never happens to anyone else if we can prevent it. William, I'm a housekeeper. I don't have a business degree or pharmaceutical experience or... Your father saw potential in me when I had nothing but an idea. I see the same strength, intelligence, and determination in you. Plus, you understand what our patients face in ways I never could. That's invaluable. He paused. The salary is $85,000 a year, full benefits, childcare stipend. It's not charity. It's the job your father asked me to create, and you're the only person qualified to do it. Tamara stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. $85,000? William, that's more than I make in 2 years. It's what the position pays. What you're worth. He pulled out his phone and showed her something. A document he'd clearly drafted earlier. I'm serious about this. Read through the job description. Think about it. But Tamara, this is what your father wanted. For you to have a chance. For someone to believe in you the way he believed in me. She looked at the job description, at the salary that would change her and Kayla's lives completely, at the earnest hope in William's eyes. And she thought about her father, about the letter he'd written, about the faith he'd had in both of them. Can I think about it? She asked, her voice small. Take all the time you need, William assured her. But Tamara? I hope you'll say yes. Not for me. For your father. For Kayla. For every parent who's ever stood where you stood today. As they sat down to dinner, simple pasta and salad and garlic bread, nothing fancy but everything warm, Tamara felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt hope. And watching Chloe and Kayla laugh together, watching William smile with genuine warmth rather than pity, she thought that maybe, just maybe, her father was still looking out for her after all. Even from beyond the grave, Marcus Harris was still opening doors. The kitchen had grown quiet except for the soft sounds of Chloe and Kayla playing with Mr. Hoppers in the adjacent living room. Tamara held the letter in trembling hands, reading and rereading her father's words until they blurred through her tears. Each sentence felt like a gentle hand reaching across time, across death itself, to touch her one final time. My daughter Tamara and I are estranged, my fault as much as hers. Even in a letter to someone else, even when discussing his deepest pain, her father had taken responsibility. Had refused to place all the blame on her shoulders despite her stubbornness, despite the harsh words she'd thrown at him the last time they'd spoken. She's pregnant and alone, too proud to ask for help, too hurt to accept what I offer. He'd known. God, he'd known about Kayla. Had known Tamara was struggling, scared, trying to do everything alone because admitting she needed help felt like admitting defeat. And he'd respected her space even though it must have killed him. If something happens to me before we reconcile, I'm asking you to look out for her if you can. Tamara pressed the letter to her chest, her entire body shaking with sobs she couldn't contain. William had moved closer, one hand on her shoulder, offering comfort without words while she fell apart in his expensive kitchen. He knew, she finally managed to gasp out between sobs. He knew about Kayla and he respected my space. He gave me the room I demanded. And I thought he didn't care. I thought he'd written me off. But he was just waiting. Waiting for me to be ready to let him back in. He talked about you constantly, William said gently. Every time we met, he'd ask if I'd heard anything about you. He had a friend who worked at the hospital where you delivered Kayla. That's how he knew. But he made that friend promise not to share details, not to violate your privacy. He said you'd come back when you were ready, that pushing would only drive you further away. I was so stupid, Tamara whispered. So proud and stupid. I wasted 2 years we could have had together. Kayla could have known her grandfather. He could have held her, seen her smile, heard her laugh. And I stole that from both of them because I was too stubborn to admit I'd made mistakes. You weren't stupid. You were hurt and scared and trying to survive. William pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. Your father understood that better than anyone. He told me once that strength sometimes looks like asking for help, but it also sometimes looks like standing alone when you need to prove, to yourself more than anyone, that you can. He was proud of you, Tamara. Even when you weren't speaking. Especially then, maybe. Tamara wiped at her face with the tissue William had given her, though fresh tears kept coming. I don't know how to. I can't go back and fix it. I can't undo. No, William agreed. But you can honor him going forward. You can be the mother he wanted you to be, the woman he knew you could become. You can take the chance he's giving you, even from beyond the grave, and make something of it. She looked up at him, seeing the earnestness in his expression, the absence of pity or judgment. Just understanding. Just hope. When he died, William continued, his voice soft, I tried to find you. I went through his office, with the university's permission, looking for any information about how to contact you. But your father had been meticulous about protecting your privacy. There were no addresses, no phone numbers. Just your name and a few old photos and stories he'd told over the years. I searched social media, hired a private investigator, but Tamara Harris's is a common name, and I didn't even know if you'd kept his last name. After 6 months, I gave up. I thought I'd failed him. That I'd never be able to fulfill his last request. He gestured at the letter still clutched in her hands. I've carried that with me for 2 years. Read it dozens of times, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. How I was supposed to find you, help you, without even knowing where you were." He paused, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And then today in that pharmacy when you said your name. Tamara, I don't believe in coincidences. Not ones this impossible. You think he, what? Orchestrated this from wherever he is. I think the universe has a way of bringing people together when they need each other most. Maybe it was your father. Maybe it was just fate. But you were in that pharmacy today. You needed that specific medication, one my company makes. And I was there to witness it, to finally understand what he'd been asking me to do." William leaned forward. "Your father spent his life opening doors for people. That's what he did for me. That's what he wanted me to do for you. Not charity. Not pity. Opportunity." Tamara set the letter down carefully on the kitchen table, smoothing out its creases with gentle fingers. "The job you mentioned. Director of Patient Advocacy. You were serious about that?" "Completely serious. Let me show you something." William pulled out his phone and opened a document, then handed it to her. "I drafted this job description tonight while you were giving Kayla her medicine. Read it." Tamara took the phone, her hands still shaking slightly, and began to read. "Director of Patient Advocacy and Access Programs, Carter Pharmaceuticals. Position summary. Lead the development and implementation of comprehensive patient assistance programs designed to ensure that cost is never a barrier to accessing life-saving medications. This role requires someone who understands both the systemic failures of healthcare access and the human cost of those failures. The ideal candidate will have lived experience with healthcare inequity and the passion to transform Carter Pharmaceuticals' approach to patient support." The description went on, detailing responsibilities that sounded both overwhelming and somehow exactly right. Creating sliding scale pricing programs. Partnering with community health centers. Establishing emergency medication funds. Fighting for policy changes within the company to prioritize access over profit margins. "William, this is a real position. This isn't something you just made up for me. It's a position that should have existed years ago," he said firmly. "I've been talking about patient access programs for 5 years, and my board keeps pushing it to next quarter because it's not profitable enough, not strategic enough. But your father was right. I forgot where I came from. I let the business side of things eclipse the human side. Meeting you today, seeing what you went through, what families go through every single day because of pricing decisions I've justified and defended." He shook his head. "I can't do that anymore. This position is happening with or without you. But Tamara, you're the person who should lead it. You understand what's at stake in ways I never could." "I'm a housekeeper," Tamara said, the words feeling small and inadequate. "I clean hotel rooms. I make beds and scrub toilets. I have 2 years of college that I couldn't finish because I got pregnant and couldn't afford both tuition and prenatal care. I don't know anything about pharmaceutical business or healthcare policy or—" "Stop," William interrupted, but gently. "Stop telling me what you're not. Tell me what you are." Tamara blinked, thrown by the question. "You're a mother who fought through a system designed to make people like you fail," William continued. "You're a woman who stood in that pharmacy today and had to make an impossible choice with dignity and grace. You're Marcus Harris's daughter, which means you have his intelligence, his determination, his unwillingness to accept injustice as inevitable." He paused. "You know what the actual requirements for this job are? Empathy. Courage. The ability to see past spreadsheets and quarterly earnings to the human beings affected by our decisions. You have all of that. Everything else, the business knowledge, the policy expertise, I can teach you. Your father taught me everything I needed to know about biochemistry and pharmaceutical development. Let me do the same for you in this." "What's the salary?" Tamara asked, almost afraid to know. Whatever it was, it would be more than she made now. Even $30,000 a year would double her current income. $85,000 annually, William said, watching her face. Plus full benefits, health, dental, vision, that kick in immediately. Not in 30 days or 60 days. The day you start. A childcare stipend of $15,000 per year to ensure Kayla gets quality care while you're working. And a signing bonus of $10,000 to help you get settled, cover immediate expenses, maybe move to a safer neighborhood. Tamara's vision swam. She gripped the edge of the kitchen table, certain she'd misheard. $85,000? That's... William, I make $26,000 a year right now. Before taxes. You're talking about more than tripling my salary for a job I'm not even qualified for. You're more qualified than anyone I could hire from a business school, William countered. Those candidates would have MBAs and impressive resumes and absolutely no understanding of what you know in your bones. What it feels like to be on the other side of our industry's decisions. That knowledge is invaluable. Irreplaceable. She stared at him, trying to process not just the numbers but what they meant. No more choosing between rent and food. No more panic attacks over unexpected expenses. No more standing in pharmacies unable to afford medicine. Kayla could go to a good daycare instead of Tamara's elderly neighbor who watched her out of kindness but couldn't really keep up with a toddler. They could move somewhere with working locks and heat that didn't cut out in winter. They could breathe. There's a catch, William said, and Tamara's heart sank. Of course there was. Nothing this good came without strings. The pharmaceutical industry is cutthroat. My board of directors are smart, successful people, but many of them prioritize profit over everything else. They're not going to like an outsider in a senior position. They're going to question your qualifications, your background, probably your motives. Because I'm black, Tamara said flatly. It wasn't a question. William hesitated, then nodded. That will be part of it, yes. I wish I could tell you otherwise, but I won't lie to you. Some of them will assume you're a diversity hire, that I'm virtue signaling or trying to generate positive PR. They'll scrutinize everything you do, waiting for you to fail so they can say, I told you so. So why offer me the job if it's going to be that hard? Because hard doesn't mean impossible. And because my VP of Operations, Victoria Thornton, is going to see this as nepotism anyway, she opposed the patient advocacy program from the start, said it would hurt profit margins. She'll fight you regardless of your credentials. At least this way you'll be fighting for something real. Something your father would believe in. Tamara looked at the letter again, at her father's handwriting, at his final request to William. Look out for her if you can. This was it. This was her father, 2 years gone, still trying to open doors for her. Still believing she could be more than her circumstances had allowed. Still fighting for her future even though he wouldn't be there to see it. I'm terrified, she admitted quietly. I don't know if I can do this. If I'm strong enough or smart enough or... Your father was terrified when he co-signed that loan for me, William said. He was risking everything for someone he barely knew, on nothing but faith that it was the right thing to do. He did it anyway. That's where you come from, Tamara. That's who you are. Not someone who gives up because something is hard. Someone who does the hard thing because it matters. In the living room, Kayla laughed, a genuine happy sound that Tamara hadn't heard in days. The medicine was working. Her baby was getting better. Because a stranger had paid for antibiotics in a pharmacy, because that stranger turned out to be connected to her father, because somehow, impossibly, the universe had aligned to bring them together exactly when they both needed it most. I'll do it, Tamara said, the words coming out stronger than she felt. Not for me. For Kayla. For my father's legacy. For every parent who stood where I stood today, forced to choose between impossible options. She looked at William directly. I'll probably fail sometimes. I'll make mistakes. I'll need help and guidance and patience. But I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired. I promise you that. William's face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that transformed him from wealthy executive to just a man who'd been given a chance to honor someone he loved. That's all your father would have asked. That's all I'm asking now. When do I start? That's the other thing I need to tell you. William's smile faded slightly, replaced by something more serious. Tomorrow is our quarterly board meeting. I'm going to announce a major initiative, the Marcus Harris Healthcare Program. A comprehensive patient assistance program that will provide free or subsidized medications to families who can't afford them. It's something I should have done years ago. Something your father would have demanded I do. That's amazing, Tamara said, feeling a swell of hope. My father would love that. And I'm going to announce you as its director, William continued. In front of the entire board. In front of Victoria Thornton, who's going to oppose it with everything she has. In front of people who'll question whether you're qualified, whether this is appropriate, whether I've lost my mind. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Tamara, it's going to cause a storm. The announcement will be controversial enough. Adding you to it, explaining our connection, defending the decision, it's going to be brutal. Are you sure you're ready for that? Tamara thought about her father, standing in front of skeptical colleagues and defending a broke graduate student's wild ideas. She thought about him risking his family's financial security on nothing but faith. She thought about him carrying the weight of other people's doubt because he believed in something more important than comfort or safety. I'm ready, she said, and meant it. Let them bring the storm. My father taught me how to stand in storms. William nodded slowly, respect clear in his expression. Then tomorrow we honor Marcus Harris the way he deserves to be honored. By fighting for the people he spent his life fighting for. By refusing to accept that profit is more important than human life. By being the kind of people he believed we could be. He extended his hand across the table and Tamara took it. Not a handshake of business transaction but something deeper. A promise. A covenant. A partnership forged in grief and hope and the unshakable belief that one man's legacy could still change the world. To Marcus Harris, William said softly. To my father, Tamara agreed, tears streaming down her face again, but different tears now. Not grief alone, but something more complex. Sorrow and gratitude and determination all mixed together. In the living room, Chloe called out, Daddy, can Kayla come play at our house again? She's my friend now. And Kayla, her fever finally breaking, her breathing easier, laughed and clapped her small hands together in agreement. Tamara looked at her daughter, healthy because of medicine she could now afford, playing with a child from a completely different world who'd welcomed her with open-hearted generosity. She looked at William, who'd honored a dead man's request without hesitation, who'd offered not pity but opportunity. And she thought about her father, about the man who'd believed in impossible things and made them possible through sheer force of will and love. Tomorrow would bring challenges, opposition, doubt. People who would want her to fail, who would question her right to be in the room where decisions were made. But tonight, in this warm kitchen, holding her father's final letter, Tamara Harris made a choice. She would step into the storm. She would fight for families like hers. She would honor the man who'd opened doors all his life by walking through the one he'd opened for her. Even from beyond the grave, Marcus Harris was still changing lives. And his daughter, finally understanding the depth of his love and faith, was ready to carry that legacy forward. What time is the board meeting? She asked William. 9 a.m. At company headquarters downtown. Then I'll be there at 8:30, Tamara said firmly. Early. Ready. Whatever happens, we face it together. William smiled, but she could see the worry in his eyes. The knowledge of what they were about to walk into. The storm that was coming. But they would face it the way Marcus Harris had taught them both to face impossible things. With courage, with integrity, and with the unshakable belief that doing the right thing was always worth the cost. No matter how high that cost might be. Monday morning arrived with a kind of cold, gray drizzle that made everything feel more difficult. Tamara stood outside Carter Pharmaceuticals headquarters at 8:15 a.m., staring up at the building that might become her workplace or the site of her most public humiliation. The structure was all glass and steel, soaring 30 stories into the overcast sky. Everything about it screamed wealth, power, permanence. The kind of building where important decisions were made by important people. The kind of building where a former housekeeper had no business being. She'd worn her best outfit, the black dress she saved for church, paired with a blazer she'd found at Goodwill for $8. Her shoes were her only pair of flats that didn't have visible wear. She'd spent an hour on her hair, fighting her natural curls into something she hoped looked professional. But standing here, watching well-dressed executives stride confidently through the revolving doors, she felt like a child playing dress-up. Her phone buzzed. A text from William, "I'm in the lobby. Come on up. You've got this." Tamara took a deep breath, squared her shoulders the way her father had taught her, and walked through those intimidating glass doors. The lobby was even more overwhelming than the exterior. Marble floors, modern art installations, a reception desk that looked like it belonged in a museum. William stood near the elevator bank, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. But when he saw her, his face broke into a warm, encouraging smile. "You look perfect," he said as she approached. "I look terrified," she corrected. "That too. But that's normal. I was terrified at my first board meeting." He guided her toward a private elevator, his hand light on her elbow. "Come on. We have 30 minutes before the meeting. Let's get you prepared." They rode up to the 28th floor in silence, Tamara's stomach doing flip-flops with each ascending number. William led her to his office, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture and walls lined with awards and photos. But he walked right past all of it to a conference table in the corner. "Sit," he said gently, pulling out a chair for her. "Let me walk you through what's going to happen." For the next 20 minutes, William coached her with the patience of someone who genuinely wanted her to succeed. He gave her a leather folder containing the Marcus Harris healthcare program proposal, 40 pages of detailed plans for subsidized medications, sliding scale pricing based on income, partnerships with community health centers, emergency medication funds. "You don't need to memorize it," he assured her. "Just understand the core concept. No family should be forced to choose between medicine and basic necessities. We're one of the most profitable pharmaceutical companies in America. We can afford to do this and still maintain healthy margins." "Will they see it that way?" Tamara asked, flipping through pages filled with financial projections and implementation timelines. "Some will. Others—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Others will see it as a threat to their bonuses and shareholder value. But we only need a majority vote. And this Victoria Thornton you mentioned, she's going to be the worst?" William's expression darkened. "Victoria is smart, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. She's been angling for my position for years. She'll see this program, and you, as a weakness she can exploit. She won't attack directly. That's too obvious. She'll ask questions, raise concerns, make implications. She'll try to make you look unqualified or inappropriate." "I am unqualified," Tamara said quietly. "No." William's voice was firm. "You're differently qualified. And that's exactly what we need." "But Tamara," he waited until she met his eyes. "When she comes at you, and she will, don't try to defend yourself by pretending to be something you're not. Your power is in your truth, in your story, in the fact that you've lived what most of these people only read about in market research reports." Before Tamara could respond, there was a sharp knock on the office door. William's assistant, a young man named David, poked his head in. "Mr. Carter, the board members are gathering. Miss Thornton just arrived." "Thank you, David. We'll be right there." As they stood, Tamara felt her hands begin to shake. William noticed and took both of her hands in his, steadying them. "Your father faced rooms full of people who doubted him. He faced discrimination and skepticism and closed doors. But he never let that stop him from speaking his truth. William squeezed her hands gently. You have his courage. I saw it in that pharmacy. I saw it when you agreed to do this despite being terrified. That courage is going to carry you through the next hour. And if it doesn't, then I'll carry you the rest of the way. We're in this together. The boardroom was everything Tamara had feared and worse. A massive mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than her monthly rent. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The 4th wall held a screen for presentations and a portrait of Carter Pharmaceuticals founder, William's grandfather, she assumed. 12 board members were already seated, and every single one turned to stare as William entered with Tamara at his side. She could read their expressions like a book: curiosity, confusion, skepticism, and in some cases barely concealed disdain. "Good morning, everyone," William said with the easy confidence of someone who owned the room. "Thank you for adjusting your schedules for this special session. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce Tamara Harris. She'll be joining us for this meeting." A woman at the far end of the table stood. She was perhaps 48, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that screamed designer label. Her blonde hair was styled in a perfect bob, her makeup flawless, her expression cold enough to freeze water. Victoria Thornton. Had to be. "William," Victoria said, her voice smooth and professional with an undercurrent of ice. "I wasn't aware we'd be having guests at a board meeting. Especially closed-door sessions discussing corporate strategy." "Ms. Harris isn't a guest," William replied evenly. "She's the subject of one of today's agenda items. I thought it appropriate for her to be present." Victoria's eyes swept over Tamara in a single dismissive glance that somehow managed to catalog and judge every aspect of her appearance, background, and worth. How unusual. She sat back down with the grace of a predator settling into position, never taking her eyes off Tamara. William guided Tamara to an empty chair, then moved to the head of the table where a presentation remote waited. "Let's begin. I've called this meeting to propose a major new initiative, one that will fundamentally change how Carter Pharmaceuticals approaches patient access and affordability." He clicked the remote, and the screen lit up with a title slide: "The Marcus Harris Healthcare Program, A Legacy of Access and Compassion." Beneath the title was a photo of Dr. Marcus Harris in his university office, the same photo Tamara had on her shelf at home. Seeing her father's face projected larger than life in this intimidating boardroom made tears prick at her eyes. 20 years ago, William began, his voice carrying clearly through the room, "I was a broke graduate student with an idea everyone said was impossible. A single man believed in me when no one else would. Dr. Marcus Harris, a biochemistry professor at State University, co-signed a personal loan that allowed me to continue my research. He risked his family's financial security on faith that I could create something meaningful. That faith became Carter Pharmaceuticals." He paused, letting that sink in. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Harris passed away 2 years ago, never knowing the full impact of his generosity. But before he died, he asked me to honor his legacy not with monuments or endowments, but by remembering where I came from. By ensuring that the company he helped create never forgot what it was like to need help. William clicked to the next slide, a detailed overview of the proposed program. The Marcus Harris Healthcare Program will provide free or drastically subsidized medications to families earning below 300% of the federal poverty line. We'll partner with community health centers, establish emergency medication funds, and implement sliding scale pricing based on verified income. "What's the projected cost?" a man Tamara didn't recognize asked. He was Asian, perhaps 50, with the sharp expression of someone who lived and breathed financial analysis. "Good morning, Marcus," William said to him, the CFO Tamara remembered from her briefing. "First-year costs are estimated between $50 and $75 million, with potential scaling up to $100 million by year 3 as we expand the program." The room erupted in murmurs. Marcus Chin leaned forward, his expression concerned. William, we made $280 million in profit last quarter, yes. But our shareholders expect consistent growth. A program of this magnitude could impact our stock price, our quarterly earnings reports, our competitive position. The board has a fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder value. We also have a moral duty, William countered, his voice still calm but gaining steel. To the patients who depend on our medications. To the families who go into debt or do without because they can't afford the drugs we produce for pennies and sell for hundreds of dollars. With all due respect, Victoria cut in, her voice sweet poison, this sounds more like a philanthropic endeavor than a sound business strategy. We have a foundation for charitable work. Why not funnel this through existing channels rather than implementing such a costly operational program? Because foundations are band-aids on systemic problems, William replied. This isn't charity. This is changing how we do business at a fundamental level. Victoria smiled and Tamara's stomach dropped. She recognized that smile, the expression of someone about to go for the kill. I see, Victoria said slowly. And this woman sitting with us today, Ms. Harris, I assume she's related to the program somehow? She looked directly at Tamara for the first time. Are you Dr. Harris's daughter? Yes, Tamara managed, her voice sounding small in the large room. How interesting. And William, you're proposing to hire her for? Director of Patient Advocacy and Access Programs, William said firmly. Tamara will oversee the implementation and management of the Marcus Harris healthcare program. The room fell silent. Tamara could feel every eye on her, could sense the questions, the judgments, the calculations happening behind those professional facades. Director-level position, Victoria repeated as if tasting the words. That's a senior role. Quite a responsibility. Miss Harris, what's your background in pharmaceutical operations? Healthcare administration? Corporate management? This was it. The moment William had warned her about. Tamara felt her throat tighten, felt the familiar shame beginning to rise. I don't have experience in those areas, she admitted. I see. What about education? MBA? Public health degree? Healthcare policy background? I have 2 years of college. I couldn't finish because... And your employment history? Victoria continued, relentless now. She pulled out a tablet, and Tamara realized with sinking horror that Victoria had researched her. Let's see, housekeeping staff at Riverside Hotel for the past 3 years. Before that, various retail and food service positions. Currently earning approximately $26,000 annually. Victoria looked up, her expression the picture of professional concern. Miss Harris, I mean no disrespect, but don't we need someone with actual pharmaceutical industry experience for such a critical role? Someone who understands regulatory compliance, corporate governance, stakeholder management. The implications hung in the air, unspoken but clear. What is this really about? Why is a billionaire hiring his mentor's unqualified daughter for a senior position? What's the real relationship here? Tamara felt heat flood her face. Not just embarrassment now but anger. Anger at being reduced to a resume, at having her entire life picked apart in front of strangers, at the subtle suggestion that something inappropriate was happening. She started to stand, ready to flee this room and this humiliation, ready to tell William this was a mistake and she should never have agreed. I knew Marcus Harris. The voice came from a woman Tamara hadn't noticed before, sitting in the middle of the table. She was perhaps 60, Asian American, with silver-streaked hair and an air of quiet authority. Dr. Patricia Wu, Tamara remembered, Chief Medical Officer. I knew Marcus Harris, Dr. Wu repeated, standing now. We served on several committees together. Published a paper on healthcare access disparities. He was one of the most brilliant, principled men I've ever had the privilege of knowing. She looked directly at Victoria. And I find it deeply telling that you question Ms. Harris's qualifications based on her resume while completely ignoring what Marcus Harris was asking William to do. to see potential beyond credentials, to recognize that sometimes the people closest to a problem understand it best. She turned to Tamara. Miss Harris, would you tell us why you're here? Not why William wants to hire you. Why you personally think this program matters. Tamara looked at Dr. Wu, at the genuine interest in her expression, and felt something shift inside her. William had told her not to defend herself by pretending to be something she wasn't. To speak her truth. She stood, her legs shaky but holding her weight. 3 days ago, she began, her voice quiet but gaining strength. I stood in Riverside Pharmacy trying to buy antibiotics for my daughter. She has a respiratory infection. She was having trouble breathing. The doctor said without treatment she could end up hospitalized. The medication cost $347.82. I had $89 to my name. She looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. I stood there in front of a line of people and told the pharmacist I had to return the medicine. I couldn't afford it. I was failing my daughter in the most basic way a parent can fail. The room was utterly silent now. Mr. Carter was in that pharmacy. He paid for the medication. And later, I learned that the antibiotic that cost me $347, that I couldn't afford, costs maybe $15 to produce. Your company makes it. You sell it to pharmacies for $180. They mark it up to $347. And families like mine are stuck in the middle, trying to figure out how to keep our children alive without losing our homes. She pulled out the letter her father had written to William, the one she'd been carrying in her purse since Saturday night. My father wrote this before he died. He asked Mr. Carter to look out for me if he could. Not with charity. With opportunity. Because my father understood something that apparently some of you don't, that the people who've lived in the gaps of our systems, who've experienced their failures firsthand, are exactly the people who know how to fix them. Tamara's hands had stopped shaking. Her voice rang clear and strong through the boardroom. You're right that I don't have an MBA or pharmaceutical experience. You're right that I've worked low-wage jobs and struggled and been on public assistance. But I know what it's like to sit on a bus calculating whether I can afford both rent and medicine. I know what it's like to skip meals so my daughter can eat. I know what it's like to be invisible to systems that are supposed to help everyone but somehow only seem to work for people who can afford them. She looked at Victoria directly. So no, I'm not qualified the way you think qualified should look. But I'm qualified in the ways that actually matter for this job. I understand the people we're trying to help because I am those people. And if that's not enough for you, then maybe you should ask yourselves what you're really trying to protect: patient welfare or profit margins. The silence that followed was profound. Several board members wouldn't meet her eyes. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their expensive leather chairs. But Dr. Wu was smiling and 2 other members were nodding slowly. Marcus Chin, the CFO, cleared his throat. Ms. Harris, that was powerful testimony. Thank you for your honesty. Victoria's expression had gone from predatory confidence to barely contained fury. This is absurd. We can't make corporate decisions based on emotional appeals and... I move to approve the Marcus Harris healthcare program as presented, Dr. Wu interrupted, her voice firm. And to confirm Ms. Tamara Harris as Director of Patient Advocacy and Access Programs, with a 6-month probationary period and quarterly reviews. Second, another board member said immediately, an older black man Tamara hadn't been introduced to. This is premature, Victoria protested. We haven't had time to properly vet the financial implications, the operational challenges. All in favor? Dr. Wu asked, ignoring Victoria's objection. 7 hands went up. 7 out of 12. The bare minimum needed. Motion passes, Dr. Wu announced. She looked at Tamara with something that might have been respect. Welcome to Carter Pharmaceuticals, Ms. Harris. I look forward to working with you. The meeting adjourned in a flurry of conversation, some board members congratulating William, others huddling with Victoria in whispered consultation. Tamara stood frozen, unable to quite believe what had just happened. She'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, she'd survived. William appeared at her elbow, his hand warm on her shoulder. "You were extraordinary," he murmured. "Your father would have been so proud." Before Tamara could respond, Victoria materialized in front of them. Up close, she was even more intimidating. Taller than Tamara by several inches, her expression carved from ice. "William," she said, her voice low enough that only the three of them could hear. "This is a mistake. That woman," she didn't even glance at Tamara, "is going to embarrass this company. She has no idea what she's walked into, no understanding of corporate politics or pharmaceutical operations. When she fails, and she will fail, I'll be here to pick up the pieces." William's jaw tightened, his hand on Tamara's shoulder becoming protective. "Is that a threat, Victoria?" Victoria smiled, cold and sharp as a blade. "It's a promise. I give her 6 months before she's drowning. And when that happens, the board will remember that I warned them. That I tried to stop this disaster before it started." She leaned in slightly. "You're betting your legacy on a housekeeper with a sob story, William. I hope for your sake, and hers, that your sentimentality doesn't destroy everything your grandfather built." She turned and walked away, heels clicking on the marble floor with the sharp precision of nails in a coffin. Tamara realized she'd stopped breathing. "William, maybe she's right. Maybe this is too much, too fast. I don't know what I'm doing, Anne." "Stop," William said firmly. He turned her to face him. "Victoria Thornton has spent 15 years clawing her way up by stepping on people she considers beneath her. She sees you as a threat not because you're unqualified, but because you're qualified in ways she'll never be. You have empathy, integrity, and lived experience she can't buy with all her MBA credentials. But what if I do fail? Then we learn from it and try again. That's what your father taught me. That failure is only permanent if you let it stop you from trying again." He smiled. "Besides, you're not doing this alone. I'll be with you every step. And you have Dr. Wu's support now. That matters more than you know." Tamara looked around the boardroom at the space where she'd just fought for her right to exist in a world that had tried to exclude people like her for so long. She thought about her father, about his courage, about the letter he'd written asking William to give her a chance. "Okay," she said, squaring her shoulders. "Okay, let's do this. Let's prove Victoria Thornton wrong." William's smile widened. "That's the Marcus Harris spirit I was hoping for." As they left the boardroom together, Tamara caught her reflection in the glass wall. She barely recognized herself, not because she looked different, but because she stood different. Taller. Stronger. Like someone who belonged in rooms where important decisions were made. Like her father's daughter. The storm Victoria promised was coming. But Tamara Harris had survived worse storms. And this time she wouldn't face it alone. 3 months later, Tamara stood in her new office on the 26th floor of Carter Pharmaceuticals, watching the sun rise over the city. It was 6:15 a.m. She'd been there since 5:30, reviewing case files and medication requests before the day officially began. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she barely noticed. The office still didn't quite feel like hers. Too big, too polished, with its modern furniture and expansive windows. Her modest possessions, a photo of Kayla, the framed picture of her father in his university office, a small succulent plant that Chloe had given her, looked lost on the massive desk. But she was here. Against all odds, she'd survived 3 months. Barely. The learning curve had been more like a learning cliff. Tamara worked 60-hour weeks minimum, often more. Her evenings were spent reading pharmaceutical regulations until the words blurred together, studying insurance reimbursement systems that seemed designed to confuse, parsing healthcare policy documents written in language that felt deliberately opaque. Her small apartment was now littered with textbooks William had given her, post-it notes covering every surface with terminology she was trying to memorize. William had become her lifeline, mentoring her with the same patience and faith her father had once shown him. They met every morning at 7 a.m. for what he called strategy sessions, but what felt more like survival lessons. He taught her how to read financial reports, how to navigate corporate politics, how to speak the language of boardrooms while never losing sight of the human beings behind the numbers. "Your father used to tell me," William had said during one particularly overwhelming week, "that the best scientists never forget they're serving people, not just pursuing knowledge." The same is true for us. When the regulations and spreadsheets feel overwhelming, remember why we're doing this. Remember that pharmacy. She did remember. Every single day. It was the only thing that kept her going when the work felt impossible, when the culture of Carter Pharmaceuticals felt alien and hostile, when she walked into meetings and saw Victoria Thornton's cold smile and knew she was being evaluated, judged, found wanting. But slowly, impossibly, the Marcus Harris healthcare program was taking shape. They'd established income-based pricing tiers. Families earning below 150% of the poverty line received medications free. Those between 150 to 250% paid on a sliding scale. Those between 250 to 300% received 50% discounts. They'd partnered with 50 community health centers across 3 states, training their staff on the application process and eligibility verification. They'd created an emergency medication fund for crisis situations, patients who needed treatment immediately and couldn't wait for paperwork to process. The work was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Every night, Tamara collapsed into bed feeling like she'd run a marathon. Every morning she woke up eager to do it again. The first real success story came in week 10. Robert Martinez was a single father of 3, working 2 jobs, construction during the day, security at night, to support his family after his wife left. His 9-year-old daughter Emma had been diagnosed with leukemia. The chemotherapy drugs she needed cost $4,000 per month. Even with insurance, his out-of-pocket expenses were $1,200, more than his rent. He'd applied to the Marcus Harris healthcare program on the recommendation of Emma's oncologist. Tamara had personally reviewed his case, seen the desperation in his financial documents, the love in the photos he'd included of his daughter, a beautiful little girl with her father's dark eyes, her head wrapped in a colorful scarf, smiling despite everything. Proved. Full coverage. $20 copay per month, all he could afford. William had suggested Tamara meet the family personally. "You need to see the impact," he'd said. "Not just read about it in reports. See it." So on a Thursday afternoon, Tamara had driven to Emma's oncology appointment. She'd sat in the waiting room trying not to cry as Robert Martinez shook her hand with tears streaming down his face. "You saved her life," he kept saying. "You saved my baby's life. I was going to have to choose between her treatment and keeping a roof over our heads. I was going to have to," he couldn't finish, overcome. Emma, despite being weak from treatment, had hugged Tamara with surprising strength. "Thank you for helping my daddy," she'd whispered. "He cries at night when he thinks we can't hear." Tamara had made it back to her car before breaking down completely. This was why. This was what her father had believed in. This was what made every overwhelming regulation and hostile board meeting and sleepless night worth it. The local news had picked up the story 2 weeks later. A reporter named Jessica Chen from Channel 7 had heard about the program and wanted to do a feature. Billionaire's new healthcare program helps struggling families, ran as the headline, with interviews featuring Tamara, William, and several families including the Martinezes. Tamara had been terrified of the camera, convinced she'd say something stupid or freeze up entirely. But when Jessica asked her why this program mattered, she'd simply told the truth. "Because 3 months ago, I was standing in a pharmacy unable to afford medicine for my own daughter. I know exactly what these families are going through. This isn't charity. It's justice." The segment aired on a Wednesday evening. By Thursday morning, their phone lines were overwhelmed with applications. By Friday, the video had been shared thousands of times on social media. By the following Monday, 3 other pharmaceutical companies had announced they were exploring similar programs. "You're starting a movement," William had said, showing her the news coverage in his office. There was something in his expression, pride certainly, but also something else she couldn't quite identify. Something that made her suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how his presence had become as necessary to her as breathing. She'd stepped back quickly, professionally. "We're starting a movement," she'd corrected. "This is your program too." "No," he'd said softly. "It's your father's program. We're just the ones building it for him." The friendship between them had deepened over those 3 months in ways Tamara hadn't anticipated. They spent hours together, in meetings, yes, but also in quieter moments. Coffee before dawn while they planned the day. Late evenings reviewing applications and making decisions about who to help next. Conversations that started about work and drifted into personal territory. His grief over Margaret, her regrets about her father, their shared understanding of loss and second chances. Chloe and Kayla had become inseparable. At least twice a week, Tamara brought Kayla to William's house after work. The girls would play for hours while Tamara and William reviewed documents at his kitchen table, their daughter's laughter a constant background soundtrack. Kayla had grown healthy and vibrant, no longer the sick, wheezing toddler from that first terrible day. She adored Chloe, following her around like a shadow, calling her Silfo in her limited vocabulary. Tamara had moved to a new apartment, nothing extravagant but safe, with working locks and reliable heat, and a separate bedroom for Kayla. She'd bought her daughter new clothes that actually fit, toys that weren't from dollar stores, books instead of relying solely on the library. Small luxuries that felt enormous after years of deprivation. And she'd enrolled in online business courses, determined to fill the gaps in her education. 2 classes at a time, studied late at night after Kayla was asleep. William had offered to pay, but she'd refused. Some things she needed to do herself. "You're working yourself to death," William had observed one evening, finding her in her office at 9 p.m., textbooks spread across her desk alongside work documents. "I'm working to prove I belong here," she'd countered. "You already belong here. You don't have to prove anything." "Yes, I do. To Victoria. To the board members who voted against me. To myself." She'd looked up at him, suddenly aware of how exhausted she must look. "I can't afford to fail, William. Too many people are depending on this program." He'd pulled up a chair beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive that she'd come to associate with safety and support. "My father used to say that the best revenge against people who doubt you is success. But Tamara, you're already succeeding. The program is working. Families are getting help. You're doing exactly what Marcus asked me to help you do. Then why does it feel like I'm one mistake away from losing everything?" William had hesitated, then admitted, "Because Victoria is making sure you feel that way." The sabotage had started small. Budget requests that should have been approved in days sat on Victoria's desk for weeks. Staff meetings were scheduled during times Tamara had standing appointments with community health centers, forcing her to choose between important external relationships and internal politics. Key information about pharmaceutical pricing or regulatory changes somehow failed to reach Tamara's inbox, leaving her blindsided in meetings. Nothing overt. Nothing Tamara could prove was deliberate. Just 1,000 small obstacles that accumulated into significant disadvantage. Then Jade had appeared in her office doorway one morning, a young executive assistant who worked on Victoria's floor but whose sympathetic glances suggested she didn't share her boss's worldview. "Miss Harris, can I talk to you? Off the record." Tamara had gestured her inside, confused. Jade had closed the door, her expression troubled. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this. Could cost me my job. But you need to know, Victoria is building a case against you. She has a folder, literally a physical folder, where she's documenting every mistake you make. Every missed meeting, every delayed report, every procedural error. Even things that aren't really your fault, she's spinning to make you look incompetent. Tamara's stomach had dropped. Why? Because you're a threat. The board approved your program over her objection. The media coverage has been glowing. You're making pharmaceutical executives look heartless by comparison, and that's bad for people like Victoria who prioritize profits over everything else. Jade had leaned forward. She's waiting for you to make a big enough mistake that she can call an emergency board meeting and have you removed. Please just be careful. Triple check everything. After Jade left, Tamara had sat in her office feeling the walls close in. The pressure had been building for weeks, but now it had a name and a face and a strategy. Victoria wasn't just hostile, she was actively working to destroy Tamara's position. She told William that evening, expecting advice, strategy, protection. Instead, he'd been furious. I'll talk to her. This is unacceptable. I'm the CEO, and if Victoria thinks she can undermine... No, Tamara had interrupted. If you fight my battles, it proves I can't handle the job. Victoria wins either way, either she gets me fired or she forces you to protect me, which makes me look weak and dependent. She'd taken a deep breath. I have to do this myself. I have to be so good, so careful, so perfect that there's nothing she can use against me. Tamara, that's an impossible standard. It's the standard I have to meet. Welcome to being a black woman in corporate America. The crisis came on a Tuesday in mid-March. St. Joseph's Community Health Center, one of their partner clinics serving a low-income neighborhood, reported a medication shortage. 15 patients who'd been approved for subsidized insulin hadn't received their supplies. The pharmacy had never gotten the order. Investigation revealed a failed electronic submission. Paperwork that should have been processed through Carter Pharmaceuticals' fulfillment system but had somehow been lost in digital limbo. The error traced back to a form Tamara had approved 3 weeks earlier. A checkbox she'd missed. A single oversight in hundreds of documents she reviewed weekly. 15 diabetic patients had gone days without consistent insulin. One had ended up in the emergency room with dangerously high blood sugar. All because Tamara hadn't caught a missing checkbox. She'd stared at the error report in her office, her hands shaking, feeling the weight of her inadequacy crushing down. This was exactly what Victoria had been waiting for. This was proof that Tamara was in over her head, that good intentions weren't enough, that you couldn't put a former housekeeper in charge of complex pharmaceutical operations and expect competence. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe she didn't belong here. William had found her at her desk at midnight, still staring at the error report, having sent apology emails to every affected patient that felt wholly inadequate. We fixed it, he'd said gently, sitting beside her. All 15 patients received their insulin this morning. The man who was hospitalized is stable. No permanent harm. I almost killed someone, William. Because I missed a checkbox. You made a mistake in a system designed to be confusing. A system with too many checkboxes and not enough safeguards. This wasn't your failure, it was a process failure. And we've already implemented redundancies to make sure it doesn't happen again. Victoria is going to use this. You know she will. William had been quiet for a long moment. Then, yes, she probably will. But Tamara, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is how we respond. You responded with accountability, transparency, and immediate action to protect patients. That's what leadership looks like. But his words, however kind, couldn't erase the guilt or the fear. Tamara had gone home that night feeling the precariousness of her position more acutely than ever. She'd climbed so far so fast. The fall was going to be devastating. The email arrived Friday afternoon, sent to the entire board of directors with Tamara CC'd. Urgent. Emergency board meeting requested. Subject. Marcus Harris Healthcare Program, Operational Failures and Leadership Concerns. Monday 9 a.m. Attendance mandatory. Victoria Thornton, VP of Operations. Tamara had read it 3 times, each reading making her stomach sink further. This was it. The moment Victoria had been building toward for 3 months. Her phone rang. "William." "Don't panic," he said before she could speak. "She's calling an emergency board meeting, William. She's going after the program. She's going after me." "I know. I got the email." He paused. "Tamara, listen to me. These 3 months, you've built something extraordinary. Hundreds of families have been helped. The program works. You've proven that beyond any doubt. But I made a mistake. A mistake that hurt people. She has everything she needs to. She has one error in 3 months of flawless work. We're going to walk into that boardroom on Monday, and we're going to show them exactly what you've accomplished. We're going to let the families you've helped speak for you. We're going to remind those board members why they approved this program in the first place. And if that's not enough?" William's voice was firm, certain. "Then we fight. The way your father taught us to fight. With truth, with integrity, and with the absolute conviction that what we're doing matters more than corporate politics or profit margins." After they hung up, Tamara sat in her office as the sun set over the city, painting the glass towers in shades of orange and red. She thought about her father, about the courage it must have taken to co-sign that loan for William, about the faith required to risk everything on potential rather than proven credentials. She thought about Emma Martinez, alive and fighting cancer because Tamara had approved her application, about Robert's tears of gratitude, about the hundreds of other families whose stories filled her files, whose lives had been changed by a program Victoria wanted to dismantle. And she thought about that pharmacy, about standing at the counter unable to afford medicine for Kayla, about the shame and desperation and overwhelming sense of being invisible to systems that should have cared. Victoria Thornton wanted to prove Tamara didn't belong in corporate America. That people like her, black, poor, undereducated, should stay in their place cleaning rooms and staying invisible. But Tamara's father had taught her something Victoria would never understand, that belonging wasn't something you waited for permission to claim. It was something you took, defended, earned through courage and persistence and refusing to accept other people's definitions of your worth. Monday was coming. The storm Victoria had promised was finally here. But Tamara Harris had survived worse storms. And this time she had something she'd never had before. Proof that she wasn't just surviving, she was succeeding. Proof in the form of hundreds of families who had their medications, their health, their hope, because she'd refused to accept that the system couldn't change. Victoria could bring her evidence of one mistake. Tamara would bring evidence of 3 months of lives saved. Let the storm come. She was ready. Monday morning arrived with the heaviness of impending judgment. Tamara entered the boardroom at 8:45 a.m. to find it already full, the atmosphere thick with tension and barely concealed hostility. The same 12 board members who'd voted on her appointment 3 months ago sat around the massive table, but this time their expressions held none of the curiosity or tentative support she'd seen before. Now there was only skepticism, concern, and in some cases, vindication. Victoria Thornton stood at the head of the table beside a presentation screen, looking like a prosecutor prepared to deliver a death sentence. She was impeccably dressed in a black suit that seemed chosen specifically to convey authority and judgment. Her expression was calm, controlled, almost pleasant, the look of someone who knew they held all the cards. "Miss Harris," Victoria said with false warmth, "thank you for joining us. Please sit." Tamara took her seat, feeling every eye in the room on her. William sat at the opposite end of the table, his jaw tight, his expression carefully neutral. He caught her eye and gave the smallest nod of encouragement, but even that small gesture felt inadequate against what was coming. "Let's begin," Victoria said, clicking her remote. The screen lit up with a title slide that made Tamara's stomach drop. Marcus Harris Healthcare Program, a 3-month performance review and risk assessment. The next slide showed a photograph of St. Joseph's Community Health Center, followed by a stark red headline, "Medication Shortage Event, 15 Patients Affected, 1 Hospitalization." 3 weeks ago, Victoria began, her voice professionally concerned, 15 diabetic patients enrolled in the Marcus Harris healthcare program experienced a critical medication shortage. 4 days they went without consistent insulin access. One patient, a 58-year-old man with a family history of diabetes complications, was hospitalized with dangerously elevated blood sugar levels. He's fortunately recovered, but the incident highlights serious operational deficiencies in this program's management. She clicked to the next slide, a screenshot of the form Tamara had approved with the missed checkbox circled in red. The root cause? A processing error that stemmed from inadequate oversight of medication fulfillment protocols. An error that traces directly back to Ms. Harris's approval chain. Victoria's eyes swept the room. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting Ms. Harris intended for this to happen. But intention is irrelevant when patients are harmed due to administrative incompetence. Tamara felt heat crawl up her neck. She started to speak, to explain the context, the complexity of the system, the hundreds of forms she reviewed weekly. "If I may," she began, but Victoria smoothly interrupted. "Please hold your questions until after the presentation, Ms. Harris. I want to ensure the board has complete information before we discuss remediation strategies." The next slides were a systematic dismantling of everything Tamara had built. Minor budget overruns, framed as fiscal irresponsibility rather than the inevitable result of higher-than-projected demand. Procedural inconsistencies between different community health center partners, presented as evidence of poor standardization rather than necessary flexibility for diverse patient populations. Timeline delays in program expansion, displayed as failures rather than the careful, methodical approach Tamara had insisted upon to ensure quality. Each point was technically accurate but stripped of all context, all nuance, all evidence of the program's overwhelming successes. Victoria was a master at this, using data as a weapon, letting numbers tell a story that had only the barest relationship to truth. Additionally, Victoria continued, there have been concerns raised about the appropriateness of Ms. Harris's appointment to this role in the first place. She paused, letting that land. To be clear, I'm not questioning Mr. Carter's intentions. I'm sure he genuinely believed that hiring his late mentor's daughter was a fitting tribute. But we must ask ourselves, did personal sentiment override sound business judgment? The implication hung in the air like poison gas. That Tamara was here because of who her father was, not what she could do. That William had hired her out of guilt, or worse, out of some inappropriate personal interest in a vulnerable woman he'd helped. "That's enough, Victoria," William said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm simply voicing concerns that several board members have shared privately," Victoria replied smoothly. "We have a fiduciary responsibility to examine whether personal relationships are influencing corporate decisions. Ms. Harris is undeniably underqualified by traditional metrics. No degree, no relevant experience, no pharmaceutical industry background. The question we must consider is whether her appointment was based on merit or on Mr. Carter's emotional attachment to her father's memory." "Her father," William started, his voice rising, "was a brilliant man by all accounts," Victoria interrupted. "But that doesn't automatically transfer to his daughter. Legacy and qualification are not the same thing." Tamara felt something inside her crack. She'd known this was coming, had prepared for it, but hearing her inadequacies laid out so clinically in front of the entire board made her want to disappear into the floor. Every insecurity she'd battled for 3 months rose up to choke her. "Miss Harris," Victoria said, turning to her with an expression of false sympathy, "I don't doubt your good intentions. But intention doesn't equal capability. Would you care to address these concerns?" Tamara opened her mouth, trying to find words, trying to articulate everything William had taught her about context and complexity and the difference between mistakes and incompetence. But Victoria had set the trap perfectly. Anything Tamara said would sound like excuses, like someone scrambling to defend the indefensible. "The medication shortage was my fault," Tamara said quietly. I missed a checkbox on a form I should have reviewed more carefully. I take full responsibility. And the budget overruns? Victoria pressed. We had higher demand than projected. Families needed help. So you exceeded allocated budgets without board approval? I operated within the discretionary spending limits established in the program charter, which you interpreted liberally, resulting in cost overruns. Victoria clicked to another slide showing budget projections versus actual spending. The difference looked dramatic when displayed this way, stripped of all explanation about why demand had exceeded conservative initial estimates. William was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Victoria, this is a witch hunt. You're cherry-picking data and removing all context to build a false narrative. Mr. Carter, Victoria said, her tone sharp now, your passionate defense of Ms. Harris is precisely what concerns some members of this board. Are you able to evaluate this situation objectively? Or has your relationship with Ms. Harris compromised your judgment? The room went silent. The insinuation was clear, ugly, designed to discredit both of them. William stood abruptly. How dare you? I'm simply asking the question everyone is thinking, Victoria said calmly. You spend significant time together outside of work. Your daughters have playdates. You meet early in the mornings and stay late in the evenings. Again, I'm not suggesting anything inappropriate is occurring, merely that the appearance of impropriety raises questions about objectivity in leadership decisions. Tamara felt her face burn with humiliation. William's defense of her, his mentorship and support, was being twisted into something tawdry and suspicious. And the worst part was Victoria was right about one thing. There were feelings developing between them, unspoken and unacted upon but present nonetheless. Feelings that Victoria had somehow sensed and was now weaponizing. I move, Victoria said into the stunned silence, that we suspend the Marcus Harris healthcare program pending a comprehensive third-party audit of its operations and financial management. Further, I move that Ms. Harris be placed on immediate administrative leave until the audit is complete and the board can make an informed decision about the program's future leadership. Second, said one of the board members Tamara didn't recognize well, a man in his 60s who'd voted against her appointment initially. Tamara felt the room tilting. This was it. Victoria had won. 3 months of work, hundreds of families helped, her father's legacy, all of it about to be suspended, investigated, probably dismantled. She stood slowly with as much dignity as she could muster. I don't want to cause problems for this company or for Mr. Carter. If my resignation would. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it, continuing, if my resignation would resolve these concerns and allow the program to continue. It buzzed again, insistently. Ms. Harris, Victoria said with false patience, perhaps you should silence your phone during board meetings. It's rather unprofessional. Tamara pulled out her phone, intending to turn it off, but the name on the screen stopped her. Jade. The assistant who'd warned her. Who'd risked her job to help. The message had a photo attachment. Tamara opened it, her hands shaking. It was an email chain. Victoria's email address at the top. The subject line, Fulfillment System Testing, Do Not Process. Tamara's heart stopped. She scrolled through the chain, her eyes widening with each exchange. Victoria to the Fulfillment Department. Flag form #HH2847 for manual review. Do not auto-process. I want to verify our systems catch incomplete documentation. Response from Fulfillment, understood. Flagged for manual hold. 3 days later, Victoria, has anyone reviewed form #HH2847 yet? Response, still in manual review queue. Approximately 15-day backlog. Victoria, perfect. Let me know when it processes. It was all there. Deliberate. Premeditated. Victoria had seen Tamara's missed checkbox and instead of flagging it for correction, had deliberately delayed processing to create a crisis she could exploit. Excuse me, Tamara said, her voice suddenly strong and clear. She walked to the presentation computer, her phone in hand. I'd like to add something to this morning's presentation. Victoria's expression flickered, the first crack in her controlled facade. Miss Harris, this is highly irregular. So is sabotage, Tamara said, connecting her phone to the presentation system. The email chain appeared on the screen, enlarged for the entire room to see. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Board members leaned forward, reading. Voices rose in confusion and anger. Dr. Wu stood, her face flushed. Victoria, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. What is this? I can explain, Victoria began, but her usual smooth confidence had evaporated. This was a routine system integrity test. I needed to verify that our quality control processes would catch documentation errors. By deliberately letting one slip through? Dr. Wu demanded. By allowing patients to go without medication as part of your test? I ensured no permanent harm occurred. One man was hospitalized, another board member shouted. William was on his feet now, his face a mask of fury. You sabotaged your own company's program, endangered patients, and then used the crisis you created to attack Tamara. Why? Victoria's mask finally shattered. Her expression turned cold, vicious. Because this program is destroying shareholder value. Because patient assistance sounds noble until you realize it's coming directly out of our profit margins. My performance bonuses are tied to operational efficiency and revenue growth. This bleeding heart initiative was going to cost all of us, hundreds of thousands in compensation. The room erupted. Board members shouting over each other. Dr. Wu calling for order. William standing rigid with rage. So you undermined a program helping sick people, Dr. Wu said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, to protect your bonus? Victoria straightened, trying to reclaim some dignity. I did what I thought was financially prudent for this company. What all of you should have done instead of letting sentiment override business sense. Get out, William said, his voice soft but absolutely final. Clear your office. You're terminated effective immediately. You can't fire me without board approval. Actually, Dr. Wu interrupted. Given that you deliberately endangered patients and sabotaged a board-approved program, I think we can. All in favor of immediate termination for cause. 11 hands went up. Only one abstention. The man who'd seconded Victoria's motion earlier, looking sick and refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Victoria stared at the room at the unanimous rejection, and something ugly twisted her features. She looked directly at Tamara. You don't belong in this world, she said, her voice dripping venom. You never will. You're a charity case playing dress-up in a role you'll never truly fill. In 6 months, a year you'll fail. And when you do, remember that I was right about you. She grabbed her briefcase and walked out, heels clicking on marble with sharp, angry precision. The door closed behind her with a definitive bang. The silence that followed was profound. Then Dr. Wu turned to Tamara, her expression gentle. Miss Harris, I apologize on behalf of this board. What you've endured is unconscionable. Your work has been exemplary, and you've handled this situation with more grace than most of us would have managed. I move, another board member said, the older black man who'd seconded her appointment months ago, that we not only reinstate the Marcus Harris healthcare program without restrictions but expand its budget by 40% to meet demonstrated demand. Further, I move that Ms. Tamara Harris be confirmed as permanent director with full board support and the authority to hire additional staff as needed. Second, Dr. Wu said immediately. All in favor? This time all 12 hands went up. Unanimous. Tamara stood there, unable to process what had just happened. The storm that was supposed to destroy her had somehow vindicated her instead. Victoria's attempt to expose her incompetence had instead exposed Victoria's corruption. Meeting adjourned, Dr. Wu said. Tamara, take the rest of the day. You've earned it. 20 minutes later, Tamara sat in William's office, the adrenaline finally draining away and leaving her hollow and shaking. William poured her water from a crystal decanter, his own hands not quite steady. "I almost quit," Tamara said, staring at the glass. "I was about to resign. To walk away and let Victoria win because part of me believed what she said. That I don't belong here. That I'm just a charity case." William sat beside her, close but not touching. "You belong here more than anyone. You know what this work really means. Not in theory or on a spreadsheet, but in your bones. In your life. That's irreplaceable." She turned to look at him and found his face closer than she'd expected. Found his eyes full of something that made her breath catch. Not pity, not professional regard, but something deeper and more complicated. "William," she started, unsure what she was even going to say. He leaned closer, his hand moving toward her face, and Tamara felt her entire world narrow to this moment, this choice, this man who'd believed in her when no one else would. Her phone rang, shrill and insistent in the quiet office. They jumped apart like teenagers caught by parents. Tamara fumbled for her phone, her face burning, and saw her neighbor's name on the screen. "Hello," she answered, her voice shakier than she intended. "Tamara, I'm so sorry to bother you at work, but Kayla, she has a fever again. High 103 degrees. She's crying for you and I don't know if I should." "I'm on my way," Tamara said, already standing, her heart racing with a different kind of fear now. 20 minutes. Thank you for calling." She turned to William, who was already grabbing his keys. "Come on," he said. "I'm driving you. We'll get there faster." They didn't discuss it, didn't debate. Just moved together with the practiced efficiency of partners, racing through the building to his car, speeding through traffic with William's hand steady on the wheel and Tamara's phone pressed to her ear as she called Kayla's pediatrician. At the emergency room, they sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs surrounded by other worried parents and crying children. Tamara filled out paperwork with shaking hands, answering questions about insurance. She had it now, good insurance, thanks to this job she'd almost lost today, and medical history. "She'll be okay," William said quietly beside her. "Kids spike fevers all the time. It's probably nothing serious." "You don't know that." "No. But I know she has you. And you have me. Whatever this is, we'll handle it. Together." He took her hand and Tamara let him. Let their fingers intertwine. Let herself lean against his shoulder, just slightly, borrowing his strength when her own felt depleted. They sat like that for an hour, not speaking, just present for each other in the way people who've been through something profound together learn to be. When the nurse finally called Kayla's name and Tamara stood to go back, William stood with her. "I'm coming with you," he said. Not a question. And Tamara, who'd spent her entire adult life handling everything alone, who'd built walls around herself out of necessity and pride, simply nodded. "Okay," she said. "Okay." Because sometimes strength wasn't about standing alone. Sometimes it was about knowing when to let someone stand beside you. And as they walked together through those emergency room doors, neither of them let go. 1 year later, Tamara stood at the entrance of the Riverside Community Center, watching the autumn sun paint the sky in shades of gold and amber. The same community center where, just over a year ago, she'd stood terrified in a pharmacy, unable to afford medicine for her daughter. The same neighborhood where desperation had once been her constant companion. But everything had changed. Tonight wasn't a fancy corporate gala in some sterile hotel ballroom. This was a genuine community gathering, folding tables covered with homemade dishes, children running between adults' legs, laughter and conversation filling the modest space with warmth that no amount of money could buy. Streamers hung from the ceiling, handmade banners proclaimed 1 year of hope, Marcus Harris Healthcare Program anniversary, and everywhere Tamara looked, she saw faces she recognized. Families she'd helped. Lives she'd changed. Lives that had changed her right back. "Miss Harris." A young girl's voice called out, and Tamara turned to see Emma Martinez running toward her, her dark hair grown back in thick curls after finishing chemotherapy. Behind her, Robert Martinez followed with his other children, his face transformed from the desperate, exhausted man she'd met a year ago into someone who could smile without the weight of impossible choices crushing him. "Emma," Tamara said, kneeling to hug the girl who'd become a symbol of everything they were fighting for. "You look beautiful. How are you feeling?" "I'm in remission," Emma announced with the pure joy only a child who'd fought for her life could express. "The doctor said I'm doing really, really good. And Daddy says it's because of you." "It's because of you being strong and brave," Tamara corrected, her eyes meeting Robert's over Emma's head. "And your dad who fought for you." "Who we both fought for," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "Because you made it possible." "Thank you doesn't cover it, Ms. Harris." "It never will." Similar conversations repeated throughout the evening. An elderly veteran named Frank, who could now afford his heart medication, approached with tears in his eyes, telling Tamara she'd given him years he thought he'd lost. A young mother named Maria, whose son's diabetes supplies had bankrupted her before the program arrived, now managing his condition without drowning in debt. A grandmother raising her grandchildren who'd been rationing her blood pressure medication until Tamara's program made it affordable. 2,847 families. That was the number on the banner, the statistic that represented so much more than data. Each number was a person, a story, a moment when someone had stood where Tamara once stood and found help instead of hopelessness. The program had saved an estimated $12.3 million in patient costs over the year, prevented countless emergency room visits, hospitalizations, health crises that happened when people couldn't afford preventive care. But more than the numbers, more than the money, it had restored something harder to quantify: dignity. Hope. The fundamental belief that their lives mattered to someone. As the evening's program began, Tamara took the small stage, really just a raised platform at one end of the room, and looked out at the faces gathered before her. William sat in the front row with Chloe and Kayla on either side of him, the 3.5-year-old swinging her legs and grinning at her mother. Dr. Patricia Wu sat nearby, along with several other Carter Pharmaceuticals board members who'd made the choice to attend this community gathering instead of sending representatives. "A year and a half ago," Tamara began, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her, "I stood in a pharmacy not far from here, forced to return medicine my daughter desperately needed because I couldn't afford $347.82. In that moment, I felt invisible. I felt like I'd failed at the most basic job a parent has, keeping my child healthy and safe." She paused, letting the memory settle over the room. Many heads nodded in recognition. But someone was watching. A stranger who could have walked past, who could have minded his own business, who could have written a check and felt good about his charity. Instead, he paid for that medicine. And then he did something even more important. He listened to my story. He saw past the statistics and policy debates to the real human cost of a system that treats healthcare as a commodity instead of a right. Her eyes found William's and she smiled. That man was William Carter. And the reason he stopped, the reason he helped, was because 20 years ago another man had done the same for him. My father, Dr. Marcus Harris. A large photo of her father appeared on the screen behind her. The same university office photo, but enlarged, his kind eyes seeming to look out at everyone gathered. My father believed that we have a responsibility to each other. That those who have been given advantages, whether through luck or hard work or circumstance, have a duty to open doors for others. He risked his family's financial security to help a graduate student everyone else had given up on. He never asked for repayment. He just asked that the kindness be passed forward. Tamara's voice caught. I was estranged from my father when he died. I never got to tell him about Kayla, never got to say I was sorry for letting pride keep us apart. But somehow, even after death, he was still taking care of me. Still opening doors. He brought William and me together in that pharmacy. He made sure I'd have the chance he always wanted me to have. She wiped at her tears, not bothering to hide them. This program isn't just about medication access. It's about honoring a man who believed people mattered more than profit. It's about proving that corporations can be successful and compassionate. It's about building a world where no parent ever has to stand in a pharmacy and choose between rent and medicine. The room erupted in applause. People were standing, some crying, all of them understanding that this was bigger than one program or one company. This was about fundamental human dignity. When the applause finally settled, William joined her on stage. "We have one more announcement," he said, his hand finding the small of Tamara's back in a gesture that had become natural over the past year. Carter Pharmaceuticals and the Harris family are jointly establishing the Dr. Marcus Harris Memorial Scholarship. It will provide full funding for students from underserved communities pursuing careers in healthcare, pharmaceutical research, or public health. Because the best way to honor Marcus Harris's legacy is to create more people like him. People who see problems and refuse to accept that they're inevitable. The applause this time was deafening. Tamara saw Robert Martinez crying openly, Emma hugging her father. She saw Frank the veteran saluting the photo of her father on the screen. She saw Maria clutching her son close, whispering something in his ear that made him look at Tamara with wide, wondering eyes. Later, as the party wound down and families began drifting home with leftover food in containers and children sleepy on shoulders, Tamara found William outside the community center. He stood under the autumn stars, his jacket discarded, his tie loosened, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "You did good in there," he said as she approached. "We did good," she corrected, standing beside him and looking up at the clear night sky. "None of this happens without you believing in me. Without you honoring my father's request." They were quiet for a moment, comfortable in the silence that had developed between them over countless late nights in offices, early mornings strategizing over coffee, weekends when their daughters played while they worked side by side. The past year had been transformative in ways that went far beyond professional success. After that day in the emergency room, Kayla had been fine, just a routine virus. Something had shifted between them. They'd stopped pretending the connection was purely professional or merely friendship. They hadn't rushed into anything. Both carried too much past hurt for that. But slowly, carefully, they'd built something real. Family dinners became routine. Weekends together with the girls became expected rather than coincidental. They'd navigated the tricky waters of introducing a romantic relationship to young children, watching as Chloe and Kayla had simply accepted what the adults took months to acknowledge. They belonged together. Tamara had moved into a real house 6 months ago, modest but safe, with a yard where Kayla could play. William had helped her move, had painted Kayla's room with her, had hung pictures and assembled furniture and made the space feel like home. He hadn't officially moved in, hadn't pressed for anything Tamara wasn't ready for, but his presence was woven through every part of her life now. She'd finished 2 business courses and was enrolled in 2 more. Her confidence in corporate settings had grown from terrified imposter to someone who belonged in boardrooms. Other pharmaceutical companies had reached out, asking her to consult on their own patient assistance programs. She'd been interviewed by national media, had testified before a congressional committee on healthcare access, had become a voice for change in an industry that desperately needed one. "I have something to tell you," William said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations at Carter Pharmaceuticals. Not retiring. I'm only 47, I'm not ready for golf and crossword puzzles. But I'm transitioning to focus primarily on the foundation and patient advocacy work." Tamara turned to look at him, surprised. "William, are you sure?" "Very sure. The board approved it this morning." He smiled. "And they approved promoting you to Vice President of Patient Advocacy and Corporate Responsibility. Expanded role, bigger staff, more authority to implement programs across all our product lines." "VP," Tamara breathed. From housekeeper to director had seemed impossible. This felt like a dream. "You've earned it 10 times over. The industry is watching what we're doing, Tamara. You're changing how pharmaceutical companies think about their responsibility to patients. That deserves recognition." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" "Always." "I've struggled with guilt over pharmaceutical pricing my entire career. Every board meeting where we discussed profit margins, every shareholder call where we justified price increases, every time I defended our business model, part of me felt sick. I told myself it was necessary, that this was how the industry worked, that we needed those profits to fund research. But I never fully believed it." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the streetlights. "Meeting you changed everything. Not just because you made me see the human cost of our decisions, though you did, but because you showed me what success actually looks like. It's not the size of the company or the stock price or the awards on the wall. It's Emma Martinez alive and laughing. It's Frank the veteran able to afford his medication. It's 2,847 families who don't have to choose between health and survival." Tamara felt tears slide down her cheeks. "My father gave you your start when no one else would. You gave me my purpose when I thought I didn't have one. Your father brought us together," William said softly. "Across death, across years of separation, across every circumstance that should have kept our paths from ever crossing. He made sure we'd find each other. Made sure I could fulfill his final request." "Do you think he knew?" Tamara asked. "Somehow that we'd," she gestured between them, unable to articulate the complexity of what they'd become to each other. "I think Marcus Harris understood that the best legacies aren't built on single acts of kindness. They're built on connections between people that ripple forward through generations. He connected with me. I connected with you. We're connecting with thousands of families. And those families will connect with others, and the ripples just keep going." William turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I love you, Tamara. I think I've loved you since that first night at my house when you told me about your father and I saw his same strength and determination in you. I've been too cautious to say it, too afraid of moving too fast or presuming too much. But life is short and uncertain, and I don't want to waste any more time pretending what we have is anything less than everything." Tamara's breath caught. They'd danced around this for months, both feeling it but neither saying it, both protecting hearts that had been broken before. "I love you too," she whispered. "I was angry at my father for years. For not being there when I needed him, for dying before we could reconcile, for leaving me alone. But he wasn't leaving me alone. He was making sure I'd have you. He brought us together, William. Across impossible odds, he made sure we'd find each other." William cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and sure. "May I kiss you? I thought you'd never ask." The kiss was tender and deep, full of a year's worth of restrained longing, careful friendship, and the certain knowledge that this was right. This was meant to be. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying and smiling, holding each other under stars that had witnessed one man's belief transform into two people's love. "Daddy?" "Tamara." They turned to see Chloe and Kayla running toward them, having escaped their temporary supervision inside. Chloe reached them first, slightly out of breath, her eyes dancing with mischief. "Are you and Daddy going to get married?" she asked Tamara with the blunt curiosity of a 6-year-old who'd learned that adults sometimes needed pushing. Both adults laughed, surprised and charmed. Kayla wrapped herself around Tamara's legs, looking up with her own version of curiosity, not quite understanding but sensing something important was happening. William looked at Tamara, a question in his eyes that was both playful and serious. "Someday," Tamara said, squeezing his hand and meeting his gaze with complete honesty. "When we're both ready. But Chloe, sweetheart, we're already a family. The 4 of us. We have been for a while now. So you'll be my mom?" Chloe asked, her voice suddenly small and vulnerable. Tamara knelt down, bringing herself eye level with the little girl who'd welcomed Kayla with such open-hearted generosity that first terrible day. "If you'd like me to be. I can never replace your mom, she'll always be your mom, and she was clearly wonderful. But I can love you and be here for you and be part of your family. If that's what you want. Chloe launched herself into Tamara's arms, hugging her with the fierce intensity children reserve for moments that matter. Yes, I want that. Kayla, not to be left out, wrapped her small arms around both of them. Family, she declared with the certainty of a 3-year-old who knew what mattered most. William knelt beside them, completing the circle, and for a long moment they stayed like that, 4 people who'd been broken and lost finding wholeness in each other. The next day was Sunday. By unspoken agreement, they drove together to Riverside Cemetery, where Dr. Marcus Harris had been laid to rest 2.5 years earlier. Tamara hadn't visited since the funeral. The grief and regret had been too overwhelming. But today felt different. Today felt like homecoming rather than goodbye. The grave was simple, marked by a modest headstone, Dr. Marcus Harris. Beloved father, mentor, friend. He opened doors. Tamara knelt beside it, William standing just behind her with one hand on her shoulder, the girls playing quietly a respectful distance away. "Hi, Dad," Tamara said softly, placing her hand on the cool stone. "I'm sorry it took so long to come back. I'm sorry for so many things. But I'm here now, and I wanted to introduce you to someone." She looked up at William. "Dad, this is William Carter. You know him already, of course. You saved his life, professionally at least. And then he saved mine. You asked him to look out for me and he did. He honored your request in ways that went so far beyond what you probably imagined." William knelt beside her, placing his own flowers, a second bouquet to match Tamara's. "Dr. Harris, I hope I've done right by you. I hope you'd be proud of what Tamara's built in your name. She's extraordinary, sir. Everything you believed she could be and more." They stayed there for a while, both lost in their own memories and gratitudes. When they finally stood to leave, Tamara felt something she'd never felt at this grave before: peace. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of something stronger: gratitude for the time they'd had, for the lessons he'd taught, for the doors he'd opened that continued to lead to new rooms, new possibilities. As they walked back toward the car, Chloe and Kayla ran ahead, holding hands and giggling about something only they understood. William wrapped his arm around Tamara's waist and she leaned into him, their steps perfectly synchronized. "Look at them," William said, nodding toward their daughters. "Your father's granddaughter and my daughter. Friends, sisters, really." "He'd love that," Tamara said. "He'd love all of this. The program, the scholarship, the families we're helping. He'd probably say it's exactly what he asked you to do." "Pay it forward, not back," William quoted. He was right. Some debts can't be repaid, only passed on. They reached the car, and as William opened the door for the girls to climb into the back seat, Tamara looked back one more time at her father's grave. The autumn sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold, and for a moment she could almost see him, not as the man diminished by death, but as he'd been in that university office photo. Strong, certain, full of belief in impossible things. "Thank you," she thought, "for everything. For believing in William. For believing in me. For bringing us together even when you couldn't be here to see it." The drive home was filled with the girls' chatter and William's hand covering hers on the console between them. They looked like what they were: a family. Not born of blood alone, but forged through choice and circumstance and the stubborn belief that people deserve second chances, that kindness echoes forward, that one person's faith can transform multiple lives. It had all started with a returned prescription and a stranger who refused to look away. But it had become so much more: a legacy honored, a debt repaid in the only way it could be, and a future built on the foundation of one man's unshakable belief that the measure of success isn't what you achieve, but who you lift up along the way. Dr. Marcus Harris had lifted William Carter. William Carter had lifted Tamara Harris. And together they would spend the rest of their lives lifting others, through the programs they built, the doors they opened, the belief they showed in people everyone else had overlooked. Because some debts can never be fully repaid. They can only be paid forward, generation after generation, creating ripples of kindness that echo through time. And as Tamara looked at William driving with one hand on the wheel and one hand in hers, at their daughters laughing in the back seat, at the future stretching before them full of possibility and purpose and love, she knew that her father's greatest gift hadn't been the job or the opportunity or even bringing her and William together. His greatest gift had been teaching them all that the best legacies aren't built on monuments or money. They're built on moments, on choices, on seeing someone who needs help and refusing to look away, on believing that one act of kindness can change the world, if you're brave enough to let it. And they had been brave enough, all of them. The sun set behind them as they drove toward home, painting the sky in colors that promised tomorrow would be beautiful too. The end.
If you know this story stirred something in you, drop a comment and share your thoughts. We read everyone. And if it reminded you how powerful kindness can be, please like, subscribe, and help us spread more stories that inspire hope. Thank you for watching till the end.